Oh. Okay, so a day later than planned, the channel's fourth birthday live stream, which is going to continue on the European Super League discussion. 9 out of the 12 teams have confirmed that they are pulling out of the proposal, and some club owners and chairmen are starting to give statements, mostly apologising to the players, the fans, and the managers. There is still talk of sanctions for the 6 Premier League clubs. There are meetings scheduled for later this week. Florentino Perez, however, is saying that the plan they're still going ahead with the plan. And he's claiming that no team has formally left the European Super League, and that they will continue to plan for it. The fact that Inter and AC Milan of Italy have pulled out, they couldn't get the German clubs on the side, says that there was clearly really poor planning for this. The force is slowed, but there's been protests at Man United's training ground this morning, where angry fans blocked entrances and exits from Carrington training ground, and some managed to get inside. There's been protests outside White Hart Lane. Obviously, we saw the protests outside Stamford Bridge again in the pre build up to their game against Brighton, where Petr Cech was one of the club representatives going out to talk to the fans who were angry and protesting. And Ed Woodward's resignation. What is interesting is now that people have been interviewed and given their opinion, I don't think the clubs really, they were caught. It looked amateurish, and it appears they were caught on the back foot. Personally, that's my opinion anyway. Now, I could have just done a live stream and discussed the 4 years of the channel and the highs and lows, but I thought this European Super League is still dominating the sports headlines. It's still dividing opinion, and what sanctions should the clubs face? Now, we've heard discussions of points deductions, expulsion from leagues, removal from committees, of which looks very likely to take place, fines, transfer embargoes. There's a whole range of options open to the footballing authorities to do. Now, if the football authorities start weakening in their position, that leaves the door open for an attempt down the line at some point. What this last week has shown, or the last 4 or 5 days, has shown that there is still a massive need for reform within European football, massive need for reform, and fans are key to that reform. Now, the 50+1 model, which the Germans use, is now fresh on the agenda across Europe. I believe it is the way that we're going to have to go. There's also been the discussion of salary caps, because we know financial fair play doesn't work. And this could have wider reaching implications even outside football as well. TV negotiations and deals and media rights deals also are on the discussing block. We've heard the angle from fans about the lack of free and accessible free-to-air coverage. We've heard of fans' disappointment with the ever-rising cost. And what this period of time has shown us is the complete lack of regard for the stakeholders in the game. Now, there are calls for other chief executives and chairmen to resign from their roles within the game. What must not happen is the governing body's stance weakening. Now, I think Serafin, the president of UEFA, I think he's the right man to reform UEFA. I actually do. I think he's maybe got the UEFA Champions League format wrong with their proposed and planned changes in a few years' time. But he's still willing to reform that competition. Whether those reforms are the right way to go, a lot of fans disagree, a lot of people disagree. Well, the channel's birthday was yesterday. I just didn't do a video yesterday. I sort of had other things to do yesterday evening. Um, in regards to the situation we currently find, this is, I think, the biggest sports news story in the last 4 years. In my opinion, this is the biggest story of the last 4 years in sport. Um, you could argue some of the issues during the pandemic in the last 14, 15 months have been up there. But I think this is the biggest sports news story that we have seen. Bigger than any cheating scandal by an individual club or athlete. Bigger than any world championship win or club win or blowout result. This has to be the biggest sports story because it has the global audience. Other leagues and sports that I cover don't necessarily have that massive global audience of over a couple of billion people. The ramifications of this will continue. I don't think that the anger from the fans is going to go away. It's not going to go away overnight. It's going to be there. I think this is the one issue that has united every fan base in Europe. But the fact that Florentino Perez is continuing down this line of we're planning ahead, we're still planning for this, the plan hasn't gone away. I think with the European Super League idea that they proposed and the fact that they had such scant regard for other stakeholders within the game, including major broadcasters. We're talking major broadcasters and media rights partners that currently have contracts. UEFA called their bluff. I think that obviously the proposed Champions League format changes were already being discussed heavily. And it is well known that several of these 12 clubs were not happy with those proposed changes and were trying to exert pressure. On the side of UEFA, I think they've stood firm. They need to continue to stand firm. On the side of the domestic leagues, their domestic FAs also need to stand firm in their position. We are hearing that there's most likely going to be sanctions against the 6 Premier League clubs involved. Of the other leagues involved and drawn into this, we'll wait and see. Of the 3 clubs holding out, all have massive debts. Massive debts. On a non-football question, do I see the Redcliffe Dolphins getting into the NRL? That is an ongoing discussion with the Australian Rugby League Commission and the NRL in Australia. Those discussions are discussions. Nothing's been confirmed. We do know expansion is on the horizon at some point, but I think an 18-team league would work better. You just have to find a second location to make it 18 teams. But it's a known fact that they would become the richest club in rugby league. But that's a similar debating point to what we're having now. I understand it's a rugby league related question, and yes, this is the birthday live stream, so we could discuss more than just football. But I think the European Super League, yes, it would have changed football as we know it, and not in a good way. I don't think. I think that hoards the wealth for a very select few number of clubs, and it doesn't necessarily filter down to the lower levels at all, and doesn't necessarily benefit the game at all tiers. When the players started taking a stand and releasing statements, that in itself, I do regularly have criticism aimed at the PFA and then the players' unions across Europe. I really do. But La Liga's tried this before. Barcelona tried this before by taking games to the US, and the players basically voted in favour of strike action. They were trying to forge ahead, and then they lost support very quickly. The American style model doesn't work with European sport. It has been tried before, it has failed before. NFL Europe is a prime example of that. Major League Baseball Europe is not a prime example of that. It doesn't gain the traction required. It's a different sporting culture. I'm not saying the American way is wrong or right, or the European way is wrong or right, but it's a clash of sporting cultures. And you could argue the way that the driving force behind this was obviously Real Madrid are a big club. That's one of the biggest clubs in world football. Man United, one of the biggest clubs in world football. But the way it came across as amateur hour, and they tried to force it through regardless of resistance. Is a very American way of doing things. I think there's still more fallout to come. On the Premier League side of things, a whole range of options are on the table, including expelling them from the Premier League. That hasn't been withdrawn. The proposed captains meeting, where the captains are the players' representatives of the PFA, were to have a virtual meeting. That has now been called off. However, there are of the Premier League chief executives and clubs that weren't involved. All 14 of them, alongside the Premier League board, have discussed all options, as we know. And expulsion, points deductions, fines, transfer embargoes, and bans are on the table. Now, there are those saying that unfairly punishes the players and managers who were clearly ill-informed of the intentions from all reports. We don't know which club was unhappy with the proposals from the start. We believe it's Chelsea. Could be Man City, but we believe it's Chelsea, and they're the only club in the 12 to actually be operating a profit in the last 18 months. They have no debts. Surprisingly so, Chelsea have no debts, but Chelsea are the only club officially to release their figures saying they have no debt at this time. Liverpool didn't release their figures, they were not obtainable. All the other 10 clubs all have debts ranging from about 30 to 40 million all the way up to nearly 600, depending on the currency you're using. I mean, Tottenham are the most indebted club in of the 12. And if they fail to win the Carabao Cup final, the League Cup final, like the weekend, they're out of Europe. Basically, they won't get into Europe. So that would be catastrophic for them financially. They might recover in the league, have a better league position next season by playing less games, but that would be catastrophic financially for them. There are growing calls for Daniel Levy to go, but he's also an owner of the ownership group. He has a share in the company that Joe Lewis founded that owns Tottenham. He has a 29% stake in ENIC. So his position could become very difficult. There are growing calls for him to resign immediately with immediate effect. On the side of the Glazers, the protests have been there since they took the club over with the leverage takeover. Well, that is a concern that was allowed to happen all those years ago. Obviously, you've got figures like Gary Neville calling for an independent regulatory body. I think they're growing in strength as well. And obviously, fans want the 50+1 model to become law. And that will go across the board. And that could only have a benefit. Now, I was having this discussion last night with my friend Adam at length, quite a lengthy discussion about we should consideration should be that all 6 clubs in the Premier League that signed up to this proposal should be relegated to at least League Two, thrown out of the Premier League, which ironically would benefit all clubs in the long run. It would benefit the lower leagues massively because they've got these 6 massive clubs to play games against. So that would definitely increase match day revenue and interest with those 6 clubs down there. And it would make it very interesting to see who can actually get back the quickest to the top table, if that is even possible. It would take a minimum of 4 seasons. Only 2 of them, in theory, could get out of League Two with the way the playoffs work and the automatic promotion place. Only 2 clubs get promoted from League Two at a time, which means some of them it may take a lot longer. In theory, that's the stronger end of sanctions that are being considered. I don't think the Premier League go that far, but it would be interesting to see if they did, because it is a plausible option that is on the table. And a lot of fans do forget that Manchester United in the 70s and 80s were not a very successful side. There were very few trophies won in that period, and they were in the old Division 2, which is now the Championship, for a lengthy period of time. Man City were in the old third tier at one point. We're now in what is now League One. Within my lifetime, they were as low as what is now League One, which is the old Division 2 under the Premier League system, or the old Division 3 pre-Premier League. Spurs haven't won the league title since 1961, and their last trophy was in 2008. Arsenal haven't won the league for, I think, the same period of time. A few FA Cups in there, but for the most part, they've not been very successful either. Liverpool took 31 years to win the league again. It's only once in my lifetime, actually, twice in my lifetime, have Liverpool lifted the league trophy. but the old Division 1 and Premier League. Yes, they won FA Cups, League Cups, and Champions League and UEFA Cups in there. However, they have also had a lengthy period of lack of sustained success. It's only recently that they've become successful again. As I say, Chelsea, before the Abramovich takeover, had a couple of FA Cup wins in there and League Cups and one league title in the 70s. But long story short, they had money problems and they weren't overly successful, and they also spent some time in the old Division 2. So, out of these clubs, while they're all, Premier League clubs now and big clubs now, it's because of the money men behind them. They also have massive debts, apart from Chelsea. Although Chelsea did have massive debts at one point and were on the verge of going out of business when Ken Bates was chairman. They had massive money problems in the 90s. They were really struggling. It was amazing that they managed to have the players that they did have, at the time. But in reality, they were really struggling financially. And you could argue the Abramovich era, while they have definitely had a lot of success, without Abramovich, Chelsea would probably be in League One. And that is no joke. They probably wouldn't be a Premier League club. They would have probably got into administration, points deductions, relegations. And that is being deadly honest. Man United, if it wasn't for Alex Ferguson as a manager, I don't think Man United would have dominated the Premier League in the first half of the Premier League era. They wouldn't have had as many league titles and Champions Leagues without Ferguson in charge. Wenger with Arsenal transformed that team. And they've also been down in the old Division 2 as well. So looking at it, all these clubs at various points have gone through dry patches and lack of success. I think it was 36 years where Man City didn't have a trophy at all. So they've gone through lengthy periods where they haven't been successful. They haven't been well run. They haven't won trophies. They haven't competed for the European places. This has happened in our lifetime and before. And you have to look at the situation and go, what could be the ramifications of this? There are discussions about salary caps. There are discussions fresh on the table, and they're growing, and there's calls for it. If Liverpool were in the old second division in the 50s, they weren't a good side until the late 60s and 70s and into the 80s. That's when their period of dominance. There was a 20-year period where Liverpool were the team to beat in England, but there was periods where they weren't very successful. And the 90s and the early 2000s, yes, they won some FA Cups, and yes, they did win the Champions League a couple of times in there. But at the same time, again, league success eluded them. And there were some very, very, very below par seasons, much worse than what they're having now with this poor season. They were worse than this at points. They've gone through a lot of managers, high player turnover, and Anfield was still being filled out every week. Very loyal fan base, but this is their lengthy period of non-sustained success. It's only in the last couple of years that they're starting to win trophies again and be at the top. The Premier League eluded them until last season. There's a reason why their name is only on the trophy once, while other teams have multiple appearances on that trophy. And that has to be, there's a reason for that. There was some poor ownership in there. There were some poor management decisions, some poor transfer decisions. The Premier League, they didn't adapt as well to the Premier League era in the early years as Man United did. For whatever reason, Man United had a great youth setup in the early 90s, which the class of 92 was the backbone of their side going forward. And they made some very good signings in the 90s. Eric Cantona and Roy Keane being two key components of their early years in the Premier League. But they didn't win it every season. Ferguson only got sacked multiple times in his first 3 years in charge. And it took a while, much like Solskjaer now, to get them where they were. Now, since the Glazers have been in charge, there have been some questionable decisions. There has been fan unrest. There is a proportion of fans that have turned their back on the club and set up their own club, FC United of Manchester, which proves it can be done. AFC Liverpool is another one that's been set up in protest. I believe Gillette and Hicks initially, And there were those that still weren't happy when Henry, JW Henry, who owns Fenway Sports Group, took over as well. There was issues with the price of tickets, away support, as in supporting away fans going on lengthy away trips in Europe and in the league and in the domestic cups. There have been fan protests at Liverpool in the past. The fact that we've reached this point is worrying, but I wouldn't say it wasn't inevitable. I think it was on the cards. We've had this discussion of this European Super League in the past, and the same clubs and the same chief executives and the same owners keep popping up with these continual discussions. I think one of the reasons why it failed was not Chelsea and Man City wavering and pulling out 2 days ago. It was the fact that the German clubs and PSG did not agree. They were linked with it. They were clearly having meetings. United and Real Madrid clearly wanted Dortmund and Munich on board. They wanted PSG on board. And they decided after discussion not to join up, which I think weakened the Super League's position. They wanted 15 foundation member clubs. They got 12. The fact that they wanted to start as soon as August is interesting. They hadn't got the infrastructure in place, no title sponsors. JP Morgan Chase were willing to front some cash, but the way it was handled seemed very amateur and very rushed and not very well thought through. And with some of the comments from chief executives and chairmen that have been reported by members of the media, saying that fans, players, and managers were secondary concerns, shows a complete lack of understanding of how important fans are, because clearly without fans in attendance, revenues are massively down, which has exposed their financial mismanagement at these clubs massively. This is I think one of the good things the pandemic has shown us is how badly governed and how poorly managed these clubs are and how they've over leveraged themselves. When going back 4 years, when Neymar went to PSG for that obscene amount, nearly £250 million, that was the first video on this channel that was sports related, and I was raising an eyebrow, going, "That is obscene." This has now exposed that obscenity. But it makes you wonder where Barcelona have misappropriated £250 million or €250 million, because the currency is basically neck and neck flat on exchange rate. Where's all that money gone, and why are they racked with unsustainable debt? They're one of the biggest global brands you can think of. Even without fans in attendance, you can still buy Barcelona merchandise. So you have to question where that money's gone. There is a money hole there. Same with Real Madrid, same with Man United, same with Liverpool. These are big global brands that even without fans in attendance, they're still selling merchandise on their online stores. They're still selling matches abroad on the TV packages. Where has the money gone? And these are the questions that need to be asked. I think rules need to be brought in on regular club auditing. Rules need to be brought in where fans do have a say on how their club is run, and they get the majority stake, which means there should be no overall majority for a single owner. I think that doesn't go away. I think if the FA and the Premier League and the EFL and UEFA and the domestic FAs in Italy and Spain start wavering in their quite strong position, it highlights weak governance, which we know football has had for years, poor governance, and it allows a way back in for clubs to call how the game sport should be run. There's a reason why we have governing bodies in industry, and sport being no different. So I'll be interested in what punishments you think the club should get. We know that there's ongoing discussions to do with removing the 6 Premier League clubs from various committees. I find it ironic how everyone is saying don't punish the fans or the players for hitting them with points deduction relegation, and yet they didn't care when Portsmouth Leeds got punished. I completely understand that sentiment. I completely understand that. This is where I think when clubs go into administration or hit financial difficulties, it is unfair on the players and the fans and the managers, and the non-playing staff that work in the club shop, that work on the turnstiles, that the groundskeepers, the little men people, the little people in the pyramid. I think the owners are the ones who should be sanctioned, and this is where the 50+1 model makes sense. It stops unscrupulous owners doing what they do. I mean, Peter Risdale should be banned from football for life. Ken Bates, when he was at Chelsea, how he's still involved in football or has any kind of involvement amazed me long after Chelsea. Bates and Risdale and all that. Milan Mandrić, how these figures keep popping up at other clubs, considering the mess they've made at Portsmouth and Leeds. I think it was a shame how Portsmouth were treated. The same with Wigan Athletic, Bolton Wanderers. These are clubs that have won trophies, and people go, "Oh, it's only Portsmouth and Wigan Athletic and things like that," but they won silverware in my lifetime. Leeds, I think, won the league the last the old Division One title before the Premier League. They were the last old Division One winners. The players have to take some responsibility with the wages they demand. I think that needs to be put on the table. The players, I think, now realise that salary caps are going to be a thing at some point. Whether it happens within the next 5 years or it takes a bit longer, we'll wait and see what happens. But I think the players have to be aware that their wages are overinflated, and I think salary caps are going to be an option. If salary caps were an option back when Leeds and Portsmouth and Wigan Athletic and Bolton Wanderers and all these other clubs got in, Gretna when they were in Scottish Premiership, I think you would have found these clubs may not have gone into administration. I think you would have found that their debt could have been restructured far easier and their spending could have been much reduced. I think we have to look at the administration rules that are currently in place by the Football League, the FA, and the Premier League. The way the Bury situation was handled was absolutely shocking in 2019. And that was just pre-COVID. So there was already strain appearing in the footballing world back in August 2019. The Football League were fully aware of Bury's precarious financial situation when they were winning League Two. They were fully aware of Macclesfield's problem, and this is down to bad ownership, and this is where the current rules are broken. The fit and proper persons test, just I keep banging on about this. Fit proper person, FPPT, yep, not financial fair play, which is FFP, doesn't work because Mike Ashley, love him or hate him, he's still in charge of Newcastle. He still owns it. He wants to sell. If the 50+1 rule comes in, the fans could quite easily force his hand, and he has to sell the rest of his stake in the club to them, probably at a reduced fee as well. Then the fans will have 100. Imagine if Newcastle owned their club, the fans, they wouldn't be in the position they're in now. Mike Ashley has asset stripped that club, over a decade's worth of asset stripping. The training facilities are not Premier League standard. And it's been described as a Mickey Mouse show. Now, the Premier League has been very, very selective in who buys clubs. So they allow Mike Ashley to buy a club, but they won't allow the Saudi-led consortium with Amanda Stavey to buy Newcastle down the track. But they were happy for the Abu Dhabis and the Sheikhs to buy Man City when Mike Ashley bought Newcastle. I think, questions have to be asked. The fact that Peter Ridsdale is still involved in football amazes me as a chairman or involved in any capacity after the Leeds and other issues. Peter Ridsdale's been at a few clubs. All of them have had money problems. How Peter Ridsdale is still involved in football and not been given a lifetime ban from the sport is beyond me. But this just shows weak governance, which has partly led to the European Super League format being thought up and them getting to this point. His governance has been weak. Could you wait for bringing a salary cap? Yes, for any domestic league to bring in a salary cap, UEFA would have to agree to it. So I think UEFA would have to have discussions with the various leagues across Europe at all levels in regards to salary caps. But that option is now being forced on the table and is being openly discussed by experts. Other sports have done it quite easily. And look what happened to Saracens in the English Premiership in rugby. And look what happened to the Melbourne Storm and the Canterbury Bulldogs in the NRL, for example, when court breaching, titles were stripped, points were stripped, fines were issued, and executives were banned from the sport for periods of time. It will take some frank discussions, but I think a lot of clubs are in favour of a salary cap. The ones that aren't, surprisingly, are these 12 clubs that have tried to form a breakaway league. Because if you look at some of these clubs, they haven't been as successful as they would like to be, and others have got massive debts, and some have got both. Tottenham, for example, massive debts and not very successful. Spent a lot of money, got no return for it. So they're the ones against the salary cap because they want to keep, you know, I wouldn't say sympathies with UEFA. I think that my enemy's enemy is my friend is more how fans feel about UEFA. There's still a lot with UEFA that isn't liked. The proposed Champions League format changes, no one likes them apart from UEFA. I can't see without further adjustment that continuing as a format. A lot of people want to see straight knockouts return. Champions of each member association, which is 55, plus the winner of the Europa League makes 56. That's 7 rounds of 8 or 8 rounds of 7. It's however you want to fixture it. You could do it in 7 or 8 rounds, 7 or 8 match days in the season. Less fixture congestion. Europa League should go down the same way. Each runner-up of the domestic leagues, that's 55, plus the highest coefficient points, be it fair play or runner-up of the Europa League final the season before. If that club has failed to either win their domestic league or finish second, should be possibly the 56th team. And then the Cup Winners' Cup, again, should be reinstated. Forget this new Euro competition they brought in 2021 for next season. That's, I think, the simple fact of it. It should be 3 straight knockout competitions that make domestic leagues more competitive because you've got, yes, less European places to fight for. Plain and simple. UEFA are in a strong position right now, as are the domestic FAs. They're in a very, very strong position for the first time in a long, long time. However, I think Serafin is the right guy to take UEFA forward at this point. I think he's more willing to reform than previous holders of the position, including Platini. And we know what happened to Platini with his criminal activity, which has led Serafin to his position. And he's not from one of the traditional countries that you would expect for sports governance. He's from Central Europe, I think Slovakia or Slovenia. So he's not what you would class as your traditional Western European or North American sports administrator who's from the old school. He's from the new era of sports governance. So I think he's the right man to take UEFA forward. I don't think he's been tainted by, let's say, some of the clubs like FIFA and UEFA under previous years. I think he's his own man, and he's, I think, the right guy to take that organisation forward. FIFA, I still think, has a long way to go with reforming themselves. They're getting there slowly, but I think too slowly. I think the agenda for reform is there, and it's not going to go away. I think FIFA and UEFA need to look very hard at their international competitions, and they need to look very hard at their club competitions that they sanction as well. And we'll see what happens. Do you think that? I think there should be a FIFA-wide salary cap. I think that is interesting. That's an interesting question. A FIFA-wide, it's a worldwide salary cap. I don't think it would work for all leagues, but I think change needs to start more regionally rather than work globally. I think some leagues are trying to develop and they need to attract talent. Other leagues are already well established and are in financial difficulty, as we see across Europe. So I think a global salary cap, that could be interesting. I think let's focus on UEFA and salary caps because that's where the discussion is lying at the moment, because I think that's the organisation that's most willing to reform. Serafin, I think, is more willing to reform than Platini was and previous UEFA presidents. So I think Serafin's the right guy to lead UEFA. I do think some of the reforms he's brought into the Champions League don't necessarily work and on European club football. However, he's still willing to shake it up a bit. He brought in the Nations League. Whether you love it or hate it, I'm indifferent. But we shall see. Yes, there is a big window of opportunity. We cannot lose it. I think the pressure is now there. And I think this pandemic has awakened a lot of people to the imbalance within professional sport and the imbalance between the wealthier getting wealthier and the poor getting poorer. That's a social-wide thing, a global thing. But I don't think the fan groups are going to be quiet anytime soon. I don't think they're going to be placated by slow reform or weak governance anymore. I think they've woken up and they want change. both domestically in their countries' sporting systems and on a European scale at least. Could a salary cap give a chance for the former big Eastern European clubs to make a comeback? Yes, I think that is the case, but then just bring back the Cup Winners' Cup and reformat the Champions League and Europa League to straight knockouts, where the first two clubs in each domestic league qualify. Champions go to the Champions League, and runners-up go to the Europa League. The Cup winners go to the Cup Winners' Cup, and suddenly you would have A, more competitive leagues all around, and B, you get a wider exposure to the smaller leagues and nations in Europe. You could see a Steaua Bucharest, for example, or a Fenerbahce or Galatasaray make it to a European final. That hasn't happened for a very long time. You could see a CSKA Moscow suddenly become or Dynamo Kiev suddenly become relevant again in European football. You could see, Zenit St. Petersburg win another European title. You could see, a club like Ajax or Feyenoord or PSV become more relevant again. Ajax are dominating Dutch football, and there are concerns about Ajax's dominance in Dutch football. A salary cap could definitely reconfigure that a little bit and make it a more even playing field in Holland. And Anderlecht, who are having massive problems right now in a corruption scandal. Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to see some of the other clubs in Europe that have a great history be back at the top table. It won't happen with the current format or the proposed new format. It won't happen. And these 12 clubs are trying to stop that from happening anyway with their European Super League. So you need to strike a balance. It would be nice to see some new clubs at the table and some established clubs that have had some lean years get back to the top table. It would be nice, but the UEFA have to listen to the stakeholders, be it the clubs and the fans and the players. I think that is crucial to any changes that are made. Like Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade should definitely be in the Champions League or Europa League at a higher level. Without a salary cap in place, it makes it harder. Seeing like how competitive the leagues are, they're not winning their leagues every season. That's the joy of it. Steaua Bucharest is not necessarily dominating the Romanian league. You've got FC Cluj in there, from a small provincial town in Romania, dominating Romanian football or competing to dominate Romanian football. Panathinaikos and Olympiacos aren't the two big Greek clubs anymore because their dominance has been challenged by PAOK and what's the other one? There's another one, but there's definitely a shift. Porto and Sporting Lisbon, Braga in recent seasons has shaken that up in Portugal. Racing Santander winning the delayed Copa del Rey is shaking things up in Spanish football. So it is nice when you see like Eintracht Frankfurt a couple of years ago in the German Cup. Was a breath of fresh air. That's one of the most popular videos on the channel, by the way. We Cup Winners' Cup. They would get that showcase European appearance, and you would have some really interesting ties between some historical clubs across Europe who otherwise wouldn't make it into the Champions League or Europa League, currently under their league finishing position. It would be nice to see some new faces at the top table as well. We'll see what happens. I think the proposed UEFA format, I think Serafin he's trying to reform, needs tweaking and changing, but he's still trying to reform a system that clearly needs reforming because the group stages right now in the Champions League are dull affairs. Same with Europa League. They are just boring. They bore. There's too many games, too many pointless games, and too many boring games. Players are tired, and too many games. You want to have less games. Player welfare has got to be key as well. People go, they're football players. They dive a lot of the time. Yeah, they do, but they also have to run around a lot, and that does take it out of your body. Your knees, your ankles, your cardio. It takes it out of you. I also think TV rights is a big issue to come out of this. Fans are saying we want more free-to-air coverage of leagues and competitions. So the fact that BT Sport currently has the Champions League and Europa League in this country has gone down not very well. When it was shared rights between Sky and the domestic broadcasters in Channel 5 and ITV and the Cup Winners' Cup was on BBC at one point, that was well received. The viewership figures were very, very good. They've taken that away from us in recent years. It hasn't gone down well. Negative reaction to that. Now, I'm not angry at the presenters and the pundits that BT and Sky have hired to do their games, but I am angry at that you are cutting off young people and people from poorer backgrounds to easily access the national sport. Same with cricket. I've argued this with cricket as well, and rugby union, rugby league, with CVC starting to get involved in the Sky Sports package for the Super League, being utterly diabolical, and the lack of Challenge Cup games before the quarterfinals and free-to-air coverage. Yeah, I think we can agree that Green's gone too far, and we want to see a more open Champions League, which is the opposite of the Super. Yeah, it is. Well, I love the NHL. I love the NRL. They are closed leagues in the sense that expansion is the only way to get a new team in. But they're competitive in their own right. They have a salary cap, which means every team at the start of the season, on paper at least, has an equal chance of winning the title, winning the regular season and the playoffs. And you mean you've got a 31 team league in the NHL, about to become 32. In theory, you have a 1 in 32 chance of winning the Stanley Cup at the end of the season. In practice, it's different because it's the way your general manager and your coach assembles the squad, rotates the squad and the player base and develops players. Obviously, it's down to a little bit of man management there. But in theory, all 32 NHL teams as of next season could win the Stanley Cup. Same with the NRL. All 16 teams could win the grand final at the SCG at the end of the season. In practice, it's obviously only one of them can win it, but in theory, they all have an equal chance. And that's what salary caps give, is the equal chance and the more competitive nature. On the same token, that's what promotion relegation is all about. It makes for more interesting football. It makes for more interesting sport when there's that element of unknown. There's that element of risk. And when you've got mid-table sides, they generally play out the most boring games because they're safe from relegation. They're not making promotion or the European places, and they're going through the motions. But when you've got a league like the Premier League and the Football League Pyramid, which is so open and so wildly, each season's different. The joy of it is you get a Leicester City winning. Now, Leicester City are now well backed, and they are well financed, and they don't have a lot of debt. They're very well run, and they deserve to be one of the top teams in this country. But the season before, they nearly got relegated. Then they win the Premier League, and they've since won the Premier League. They've been a solid top half, if not European side. But the season before they win the title, they're on the verge of relegation. They survived on the second last weekend of the season. They just survived the drop. Their transformation has been very amazing, and it's down to good ownership. It is down to good, stable ownership that's very open and transparent with the fan base about where the direction of the club is. Now they've tasted success once. They want to win. If they win the FA Cup, then this is the most successful period in Leicester's history, apart from their League Cup wins in the 90s. And well deserved. It's a well-run club that has the fans and the community at its heart. Whereas Man United, it's a profitable club in the sense that it makes the Glazers a lot of money, but they asset strip it. It's a leveraged buyout. They bought it with debt, which is the debt has never been paid off, and they can't be bothered to the upkeep of the ground. The paint, they haven't bothered to repaint sections of the ground. The red paint is flaking off. That is a shambles of a club that size. They can't even maintain their ground to the same standard that Leicester can maintain the King Power, or Southampton with St Mary's. Now, Southampton and Leicester are owned by very wealthy individuals, but they're better run. The fact that they're less successful than Man United is another thing, but they're much better run organisations than Man United, and their ownership is far more communicative with their fan base, and they're far more community based. There's a reason why I like Southampton and Leicester is A, the way they run themselves, and B, the way they play. It's a very, there's the difference. And who anointed these top six? Well, it's based on what? Because Arsenal and Tottenham aren't top six clubs right now. They're not. Liverpool are hanging on to sixth place right now. So only 4 out of those 6 are in the top 6 currently on points. the season is still not finished. Three or four of them could miss out on a top six finish. There are still enough games to be played where only Man United and Man City could finish in the top six out of the six clubs that wanted to go in the Super League. That makes a complete joke out of this Super League format where they're the big six. And considering that Tottenham have the biggest debt, they're the most indebted club out of the 12. It's quite funny. It's hilarious. They win something, the debt league. So yeah, I think the greed has gone too far. The pandemic has actually exposed a lot of things. When these clubs said they could get away with not having fans in attendance a few years ago, that was a lie. It was a lie. And Tottenham and Liverpool were furloughing non-playing staff because they claimed they couldn't afford to pay them. Now we know why. Especially with Tottenham's case. Tottenham are in a no-win situation. I think Daniel Levy has got to go. He is the guy who spends the money on behalf of Joe Lewis. Joe Lewis, I think he's got to make a tough decision. The problem with Levy is he's also linked with the ownership group, the company that is the owner. He has a 29% stake in Joe Lewis's company. So it's going to be interesting what happens. But I think Levy's on the way out. I cannot see how his position is tenable. Ed Woodward's gone from United, and United fans are jumping for joy. They want the Glazers out as well, and they want that 50+1 model, whereby the fans will own a minimum of 51% of a club. That doesn't mean they can't own any more. And I do think some of these owners might start selling stakes in their clubs to the fans or other investors. They may start selling stakes because I think the willingness and the demand is there. There is no way that they can justify what they try to do because they didn't consult even the playing groups and managers about this. And it seems very rushed how they came out with this proposal, and how very quickly, Munich and Dortmund and PSG suddenly decided to go. You know what? We don't want this to go ahead. And without the two German clubs, especially, the idea fails. And PSG aren't even the biggest club in France, as I stated in the last live stream. Marseille, Montpellier, and Lyon have bigger fan bases in France and probably globally as well. They have more registered members, more registered season ticket holders. They get better attendances. So just because PSG have all the money doesn't necessarily mean that they have the history. There was a period of time where PSG were not in the top league in France. Lyon and Marseille are mainstays, and Montpellier are a pretty solid outfit themselves. The problem with the French league is their TV deal is pretty crap. It's collapsed basically, and football is not the major sport in France. I think that this is going to become a reality. I think legislation. I can't see any backtracking now from the British government. Boris Johnson is a populist. He's an opportunist, and this is helping his popularity somewhat. That he's announced they are looking into this, but there is a fan-led review as well, and I think fan power is important. And I think this is where UEFA and the FA and the Premier League and the governing bodies have taken us for granted for too long. It's not often I wear my Blackburn shirt. It's 2 videos in a row. That is rarity. That I have enough joy to wear this. But what this has done is unite fan groups who've already been highly critical of the Football League, highly critical of the Premier League, highly critical of the FA in recent years. And with social media, they're better organised than what they were 20 years ago in putting pressure on the governing bodies. And I do think, yes, we could see the 51% rule brought in, or the 50+1 rule, however you want to look at it, where fans have over half the club in their ownership. And that's a minimum. Fans can actually have more ownership on that model if the model's flexible. Look at Germany. It works surprisingly well. Even clubs that get in financial difficulties are helped out by other clubs. Dortmund and Munich have done that before with each other. I think it's Dynamo Dresden. The fans were amazing in keeping them going during the pandemic. I think on the political standpoint, there has been growing pressure upon the Department for Culture and Sport and the Digital Media and Select Committee on Sport as well for several years when it comes to football governance. They've had several reviews. The FA doesn't come out favourably out of those reviews, neither does the Football League and the Premier League. They've been grilled multiple times. There's a reason why government assistance was not forthcoming for professional clubs in the Football League and higher. And there was obviously the National League debate about nulling and voiding seasons and during the height of the pandemic and loans and grants. So other sports got government aid, football didn't. There are reasons for this. So it's been on the agenda. You can go back to the Mark Sampson sacking, which I covered on the channel 3.5 years ago from the England women's job. You can go as far back as that, where the FA were ripped a new one by the Digital Media and Sports Select Committee in the autumn of 2017. It's nearly 4 years ago. And their report then came out in 2018, and it was highly critical of the FA's management structure, its governance, its complaints procedure, and an attitude of lack of inclusiveness and lack of diversity and all the bits and pieces. But basically, the report slammed the FA quite heavily. Greg Clark then tried to sell Wembley to Saeed Khan, who owns Fulham. He's not a very popular owner with owners either. That then again united the fans against it. I think 95% were against the sale of Wembley, and those in favour were happy to see the back of Wembley because it's not a very popular stadium. But Greg Clark is no longer FA chairman. He has since gone in the wake of other issues. However, the proposed sale of Wembley was farcical as well, poorly thought through, and they undervalued the stadium because the FA is a asset wealthy but cash strapped organisation, and they put a lot of money into St George's Park, and rightly so. I think a national training centre of excellence is definitely on what a responsible sports governance should do. A governing body should do is definitely invest money in a centre of excellence, absolutely. But at the same time, taxpayers helped pay for the rebuild of Wembley. They didn't keep the iconic Twin Towers. They instead put this stupid arch up, which is an eyesore. You know where Wembley is because you can see it from the motorway and the North Circular and the train. And they tried to sell it for half its market value, which was just. And again, the reaction was much like we got with this Super League: is nope, nope. So club owners have tried this before, where they're trying to cut deals with governing bodies. What we have now seen is with the social media age and with how organised the fan pressure groups are, and the protests have been since Sunday at every ground of the clubs involved, tells you that the fans should not be taken for granted. And unfortunately, that's happened for too long. And I don't think the clubs can get away with it anymore. I think the clubs now realise they're on the back foot, even those clubs that didn't sign up to the proposal. And the last time that United and Liverpool tried to broach this proposal by also restructuring the Premier League, Leicester voted it down publicly and came up publicly against, which is why I give Leicester bonus points there, because I actually like Leicester. I do think they're a well-run club with the right philosophy behind them. It's all well and good having a wealthy owner, but you need to have the right philosophy as well and the right culture. Leicester come across as an example of how a club should be run. Much like Exeter City in the lower leagues, Leicester is another example where you can have a wealthy owner who owns a club, but it can be run with the fans at its core, philosophy. And I look at it, and then when West Ham came out and said we don't want part of this reformatted Premier League or whatever, and then the other proposals put forward, they withdrew that idea and then they've come back out with it. The timing was odd. The timing was very strange, but I think it was designed to coincide with the UEFA Champions League announcement with the restructuring. It was basically, I do honestly believe UEFA were fully aware of what was being attempted the entire time, and this didn't happen overnight. This has taken years of posturing by both sides to get to this point. They just found out that in Serafin they've got a tougher opponent than in Platini to get what they want in concessions. Much tougher opponent. But there there are still a lot of unanswered questions, and reform is going to be on the agenda. Um, but I'll be interested to see what other people think as well, because there's definitely more than just UEFA reform. I am surprised that that the PFA went a little bit stronger in saying don't punish the players. But here's the thing: the players can ask for a transfer release and a termination of contract. The fact that the clubs were basically causing the players to breach contract by doing what they were doing just shows how out of touch and how poorly planned this Super League was. It really does. The fact that they were actually in breach of the various league contracts they've signed, TV deals, sponsorship deals, contracts with UEFA and FIFA, the legal challenges alone. I mean, a Spanish High Court did suggest, they may have difficulty in blocking certain things, but at the same time, there was a lot of legal ramifications. We've seen this, as I say, with the NRL Super League war in the mid '90s. It took 3 years of High Court challenges. Can the Premiership ring fence now? I would think that's already being a highly critical idea. Rugby union, that's a separate argument, but the money side of things in rugby union is a lot less than in football. But I think if football clubs go with the 50+1 rule, then other sports will have to go down the same route because a precedent's been set in law. There are implications for other sports. TV deals would have to be looked at, and a lot of fans may turn their back on football together and actually start supporting rugby, ice hockey, cricket, field hockey, roller hockey in Spain and Portugal, which is a professional league. Other sports may benefit, ironically, from the discontent within football, because your average fan who may go, well, my family are Blackburn fans or Arsenal fans or Hartlepool fans. We're discontented with how football's been run, but there are other sports locally like rugby union, rugby league, ice hockey, where we can go and feel more valued. Then yes, you may see fans switch to other sports and support them. That could be a positive implication. I think another one could be that the 50+1 rule doesn't just apply to football. I think it could also apply to other sports at a professional and semi-pro level, which could have, again, big positive and negative implications. We'll have to wait and see what transpires. We generally will. But that is an interesting question. Are there other implications? Yes, there could be also negative implications. TV rights is a big arguing point, and salary caps are in other sports. So I am surprised football has taken this long to start discussing the salary cap issue and as a debating point. It could have been discussed years ago. It probably should have been discussed years ago. But we're now at that point where it's on the table as a discussion point. And a long overdue one as well. Very long overdue as a discussion point. I mean, it's come up as a question: should salary caps, be a thing? I am surprised football globally, apart from Major League Soccer, doesn't, and I think the A League in Australia doesn't have a salary cap. The reason why Major League Soccer and the A League have salary caps is they are smaller leagues in countries where there are other bigger established sports that ironically have salary caps. Without them, they wouldn't survive. The TV revenue isn't as big. The fan numbers are actually improving in Major League Soccer pre-pandemic. I mean, Atlanta were getting 70,000 to a game in their first season as an expansion team. The league structures are obviously different. They obviously have playoffs and regular season playoffs because of the way the leagues are designed. But the quality of football isn't actually that bad. It's far more open and equal. I think you get some really high-scoring games. You get some very interesting 0-0 draws as well because it's more an equal playing field because you have salary caps in place. And competitiveness is what sport's all about. And earning the right to win is what it's all about. So, that could be an implication is football then has discussions with other sports that have a salary cap in place or a spending cap in place about how those sports went about their reasoning behind it, how they implemented it, and what type of cap they had in place. The passion's a little bit manufactured in the MLS. American sports fans haven't got the same kind of passion that European sports fans. You just look at the crowd chanting and the noise and the passion. It is different. It's a little bit more manufactured. There are some quite lunatic fans that do follow the MLS. They've got some brilliant facilities though in America. Brilliant facilities. You can't argue with some of the facilities that they play in. And it is a growing league, and it's still, far behind the four major leagues in where it stands. It's the fifth major sports league by some distance. But the popularity of the sport is growing in the US and Canada and will continue to do so. I think what's happened in Europe shows the difference in sporting culture. But there is definitely passionate, what they would call soccer fans in the US. And they got some reasonable big name players over there who people know over in Europe. So I would say yes. There's definitely a different type of passion, and the fan bases are different. But there's a lot of cultures in America. A lot of people of second or third generation European descent from all over Europe are in America, and the Latino American population, the Hispanic population, they are football crazy anyway, and baseball crazy, but they are football crazy, especially if they're from South America in their origin, because it's a religion down there. And so they've already got the demographics in place to have fans, and yeah, fans do turn up. There's not many empty seats at MLS grounds when fans are allowed in. We already have university leagues. They're just not very well advertised. I think the university sports should possibly get TV deals. It's whether the appetite is there from the consumer to have that. But there are university leagues already in place. They're just not very well advertised and don't have the media following. Like the university boat race, for example, between Oxford and Cambridge. Other universities have rowing clubs and they do compete in competitions against Oxford and Cambridge. The boat race is the only one that gets the media coverage and gets the attention and gets the sponsors involved and the commentators. But there is a great university program. There's university ice hockey. There's university rugby, league and union. There's universities do already have leagues in place in Europe. They are just not as well covered by the broadcasters as they are in the US and Canada, because that's the difference in sport and culture is in Europe. If you play for a university team, you're an amateur, but you might be also playing for a rugby union or a football or a cricket academy, and you're going through the system of the professional sports where you earn a salary, because you can do that as a student. But the university teams are completely amateur. They could be, but that's down to the sports broadcasters going, well, here's our sports that we can sell, that we know we have a fan base for, we know we have established league organisations for, and are fully professional, and we can sell this product globally and nationally. The difference is in the US, you have the draft system with the NHL, with the NFL, Major League Baseball. Even you can get soccer scholarships, football scholarships at university, because again, there's a draft system. So a lot of the players go through the university in the US. There's also the junior leagues, which are different, which don't require, a university degree. Yes, they are, but they do get the American football and basketball, baseball, ice hockey. They do get TV coverage, and they do have TV deals, be it regionally in the US and Canada or nationally, and they get some of the biggest attendances at the grounds and in arenas and stadiums, and also some of the highest viewership figures after the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup, and the World Series, and the NBA Finals. They do get big viewership figures. But it's the difference in sport and culture. You have the collegiate system, very well established, very well organised, very well governed, which is a pathway to professionalism for those athletes. Over here, it's more amateur and doesn't really get the the sports coverage, the media coverage that it possibly should. But that's up to the universities as well to have those discussions about with the TV companies. Is this a product we can sell domestically and internationally? And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be the appetite from the broadcasters and the amateur side of sport to do so. Yes, they are, but they're also professional as well. A lot of them have had university, involvement in getting to where they are. But again, they're very minor in the sense of the sports league world. I mean, the Netball Super League is growing and is growing in professionalism and is growing in popularity. It does have a TV deal. It does have media rights partners and big sponsors, and it is getting better. And it also helps that we're one of the best nations at netball in the world. So that also helps raise the profile of the sport when you are world champions and when you are competing in world championships and European championships at a high level. And you're winning gold medals and you're winning, silverware at international competition. It does help. But at the same time, it's still a minor sport in comparison to others. The British Basketball League is hopeless. It's nowhere on the same level of organisation, governance, sponsorship, TV. It's nowhere near. But basketball is not as popular in this country as it is across Europe. In Europe, it's far more popular and it's far more supported. It's not the same level as the NBA and never will be, but it's a far more minority sport than it should be. I'm not a fan of basketball because I don't enjoy playing it. I don't enjoy watching it. It doesn't mean it's a bad sport. I don't think I'm not against it. It's just not my cup of tea. But you have to encourage people, sports fans like me, to get interested. And there's ways of doing that. And broadcasting rights and free-to-air coverage is important. Don't put it behind a paywall because it will never grow. You've got to try and get games live, free-to-air, or cheap streaming services to make it more accessible and advertise it. The Netball Super League is better advertised, and it does have. I've seen it played in pubs on Sky Sports, and that does interest me because it's a women's sport. It does interest me that women's sport has more viewers than a men's sport in this country. That does surprise me, but it's netball. It's pretty much a sport for women. So in that regard, they've already got the core of the sport correct. But netball's a highly competitive sport. But they are doing far better in their viewership, their revenues. They are making money. So that debate about women's football, women's rugby. I enjoy watching women's football and women's rugby. Don't get me wrong, because it is fun to watch. It's different. It is what it is. But the numbers are striking. That on social media and in the mainstream media, the women's netball is more popular than men's basketball in this country. So that is something to take a note of. Can it ever be popular? It needs a better media deal. The fact that the NBA comes over here when allowed, obviously with the pandemic, and showcases their games in their worlds, their overseas matches is one thing, and they do get good, fan numbers there. But again, it comes down to what do fans want to watch? Do they want to watch the NBA or the British League? And of course, they're going to watch the NBA. The same is true of the NHL in this country, but the British ice hockey is far better supported than the basketball. It does have a media deal, could be improved. But ice hockey is a more expensive sport to run, which is why it's a minority sport and it's harder to get into because it costs a lot of money to play. I've got friends who play it. I've got friends who've done coaching. I've got friends who are, club administrators. And it is a much tougher sport to get into because of cost. However, I think it's a more enjoyable sport to watch because, again, it's more open. Anything can happen. It basketball is a cheaper sport to run. At the same time, we have less registered players than we should. Can it be popular? It can be more popular if they take the right direction when it comes to media agreements and raising the profile of the sport. We need a few more high-profile British players to play in the NBA or one of the big European leagues to then grow the interest. Social media is key in this, and we have to see how they go about raising the profile. It's all well and good getting the NBA to have games over here, but you need to have a look at why basketball uptick is so low. And are the facilities up to scratch? Is the infrastructure there? Is the funding there? I would say no. Is the investment there? I wouldn't say launches a new league. I think the direction of the league needs to change, and investment is needed. And that's where I think you need to have a chairman of the sport, at the governance level, who's willing to have discussions, with other sports, who are also minority sports in a sense, on the lesser scale of things as team sports go, about how to improve their product. And with that comes media deals. If that means you strike a deal with YouTube UK to stream live matches on a BBL channel, if that means you try and get bigger name sponsors in regionally, when it comes to sponsoring, again, that has to be on the table. You need to have someone, I think, who can have those tough discussions. I couldn't name you a single British Basketball League player. I couldn't name you a single team. So that in itself is where it's struggling. I think the BBL itself, I think it's got a foundation. I wouldn't say set up a brand new league, because that then dilutes the product. I think you just need to have more investment, a goal about where you want to get the level of play at and the level of participation at. And you need to look at the grassroots at schools, at colleges, at universities, and try and increase the player pool. Because if you can increase the talent pool and make the games a better quality, you will suddenly find that you can increase audience size. That comes down to infrastructure as well, and the availability of the infrastructure to be there. So indoor arenas that can host basketball. It's a very easy sport to set up. It's a very cheap sport to run. And you can look at the NBA, it makes massive profits because it is so cheap to run in comparison to ice hockey and rugby union and rugby league and NFL. There's a lot of more money you have to put in, and your profits not necessarily are as big. This is why rugby union and rugby league are having money problems. Is it's a very expensive sport to run. You need all that training equipment, bigger squad sizes, and you have a bigger playing surface that needs to be maintained, and a bigger stadium to play into need to be maintained. So running costs work in favour of basketball. The quality level is we don't have the player base, we don't have the fan base for the domestic league, and that is down to the NBA. Leagues like the NBA possibly should or could invest more in the minor league, smaller leagues around the world, to improve the quality. That's how you do it. I mean, basketball can be played all year round. It's an indoor sport. So if it's freezing cold outside, snowing, raining, foggy, it's an indoor sport. So you could play it in summer, you could play it in winter. It's all about when you play the sport, because basketball is competing against other sports that are played at the same time of year that have bigger, more established fan bases, have bigger TV deals, and therefore you're not going to get that exposure. If you play basketball in the summer in the indoors, you suddenly only have cricket to really and the rugby league to compete against in this country for viewership. If you want to get it, let's say on Channel 5 on free to air, you suddenly have a gateway to open up the sport to more viewers who otherwise wouldn't know the sport exists. You can get a wider audience because it's a free to air channel. Whereas currently, I don't know what the TV media rights deal is with the British Basketball League. Well, yeah, if the argument about the winter break in football, um, in order to have a successful winter break, you need to have less games anyway, and that doesn't mean shrink the size of the leagues. It's about the structuring of the European competitions and the cup competitions to straight knockouts, get rid of group stages, get rid of home and away legs, straight knockouts like you get in the international tournaments. When you get to the knockout stages, just straight knockout all the way through, winner takes all. Um, look, January and February, you can actually have some. February we had some very warm days this February, so don't let the fact that it's middle of winter trick you. You can have double figure days where the temperatures are double figures. Um, we've had a few of them in February's past. I would think the winter break idea works, but you have to then look at the number of fixtures your professional sport is playing. Player welfare is key. I like the way we've gone off on a tangent away from the Super League discussion. Basketball is played in winter. You have the summer courts, which are outside the outdoor courts, and you can't use them in winter because it's cold, it's snowing, it's not pleasant, and you can't bouncing a wet ball is not particularly pleasant. Ice hockey is obviously a winter sport, um, always has been. Why it's played at the Winter Olympics, but I think if basketball's played at the Summer Olympics, it should be a summer sport. You could possibly get more fans that way because you're competing against less sports in that period of time for your viewership. The other issue you have the Football World Cup and the Euros in the summer, so that sort of becomes a problem. Is when do you have your season? But definitely, they could learn from other sports. I like the way we've gone on a tangent away from the European Super League because while I want to have that Super League discussion, and it's still ongoing, I'm going to see if anything else is broken because there's still things going on with the European Super League, and we haven't really discussed what punishments should be meted out. I should do a video on that, really, but we'll see what discussions are had at Premier League level, at La Liga level, Serie A level about punishments for the clubs going forward, because I think there will be punishments on the table of some kind. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's still quiet on the side of the Super League. It's still quiet on the Super League front. Perez obviously released a statement saying they will continue working on it. What I like to see handed out. This is an interesting question because I've raised it earlier. We could see them expelled from their leagues and told to go down to the bottom professional league in each league structure. Points deductions, fines are irrelevant. Only Chelsea, in theory, looking at the figures that have been released, actually could accept a fine because all the others have got debt. Chelsea don't. I think points deductions from next season could be interesting, where they all have, let's say, 30 points taken off and have to start at the bottom of the league, or we could see them expelled from the Premier League down to League Two as an extreme. And what the other 14 clubs, when they had their meeting, stated was that expulsion from the league is on the table. What punishments would I like to see? I think most likely what we get is some form of points deduction for next season. I can see it being somewhere in the middle of the punishment scale. But what I would like to see in a perfect world was them be thrown out into League Two. It's whether but then if they get expelled from the Premier League, which is still on the table, the Football League will then have to decide whether they accept them as members or not. And if they don't, they have to go to the non-league, which gets really interesting. But that's on the really extreme Hail Mary play. We're going with this. I think as they've all pulled out of this Super League and they clearly have realised that if they were to discuss it again, they're running out of popularity. These owners are on the back foot. I do think the 50+1 rule is brought in, whether that happens next season or down the track in the next 5 years. I think fan ownership is not. Oh yeah, League Two would be fun. It would actually benefit the lower leagues having these big six clubs thrown out the Premier League and told to start at the bottom of the pyramid. Because, in theory, if let's say Man United and Man City are the two most successful, if they're thrown out, you only get two clubs promoted from League Two to League One, which means only two of the six, in theory, could get out. However, in practice, there's 24 teams in League Two, so you've got a 1 in 24 chance of winning the title and a 1 in 24 chance of finishing second and therefore going into the playoffs, which means you then have a 1 in 4 chance of winning the playoffs. So in reality, we'll see what happens. It would actually ironically benefit football in the long run to do that. It would increase the revenues for League Two, it would increase the interest on League Two, and then into League One and Championship, and thus going up the pyramid, because there's 6 of them, and only 2 of them, in theory, can make it out of that League Two. In practice, none of them may make it out of League Two, which could then become really interesting if, again, it takes longer. The quickest a club can get out, if let's say Man City were to win League Two, League One, and Championship and play in the Premier League, it would take 3 seasons, and on the 4th season they reappear in the Premier League. So it would take 4 years for a club to get back. It would take 5 years for a club that, let's say, missed out in the playoffs. Let's say all of them make it into the top 6 in League Two, only 2 of them can get promoted. If that was to follow on again, if they say 4 remaining remain and got into the League Two playoffs and automatic promotion, that would leave 3 out of the 4 in the playoff places playing as a League Two side. In theory, if this was how it all was to work out, if they retained all their players, and yeah, it would some of them it would take 7 or 8, maybe 9 years. So we'll see what happens. Expelled motivates going to push follow through once again to leave. Well, does it? Because they've said they're not going to go back to the idea. And they are technically in breach of the Premier League and technically the Football League's agreements with UEFA. The other Football League clubs would have to vote on it. Imagine if the Football League voted against allowing them in, and also the Premier League expelled them. They would have to go to the non-league. And where do you put them in the non-league? It gets interesting, doesn't it? It does get interesting. But that's on the extreme end. I mean, in a perfect world, put them in League Two. It would actually benefit League Two and League One and the Championship massively, having clubs of that level in the game playing against your Morecambs, your Fleetwood Towns, your Accrington Stanleys, your AFC Wimbledons, your Exeter Cities. It would massively benefit the lower leagues financially. It would boost crowd numbers, I think. It would actually do what I think should happen. But I think the 50+1 model is on the way. So I don't think then the owners could take them out, but say we're going to start go back to the Super League, because you'll have fan involvement saying, no, we're the majority stakeholder. You can't do that without our consent. And I think that would still be a thing. On regards to points and financial penalties, only Chelsea have released their are in profit. Liverpool were undisclosed in their financial situation, and the other 4 all have massive debts. So financial penalties just means they have more debt. Plain and simple. I would say transfer bans and points deductions are very likely. If you put points deduction in, they won't make the Champions League in the next season, or Europa League. It'll be much more difficult. And if you were to take the points off this season and got them 30 points each this season, Tottenham and Arsenal in a relegation fight with games left to play. Man United are down on 30-something points. Liverpool would be lower mid-table. And Man City would not be in the top 4. So that could yet happen. Meetings will be had. That then makes a European ban pointless, because none of them make Europe. Maybe Man City at a push could make Europa League at a push. So you make of that what you will. That then negates any European ban from UEFA, because they seem to be very conciliatory right now. Here's an olive branch. They're not officially banned, but they basically get frozen out because of points deductions, which would make things interesting. But yeah, European bans are on the table, but I think that doesn't happen with Serafin, with some of his conciliatory language in the last couple of days since they withdrew. But if you dock them points now, they don't qualify for Europe. And in theory, if you do it before the end of the season, Arsenal and Tottenham will suddenly find themselves in a relegation fight. So that then raises a whole host of permutations, especially with Tottenham, who are in a precarious financial situation as just a standalone club. The owners worth billions, but the club itself is nearly 600 million in debt. So that would be quite a situation for Tottenham. On the debt, COVID exposed the situation. The debt was already there. With all these clubs. The problems of poor ownership quite frankly, was already there with all these clubs. COVID exposed it. We knew about what the Glazers were all about with their leverage takeover, which should never have been allowed to happen. And a lot of people said this should never have been allowed to happen. Well, then you have to look at the Premier League chief executive and the board at the time, 2005, and you have to look at the FA and their board at the time in 2005. And you have to ask questions of those individuals at the time who were in the positions of governance, why they allowed that takeover to take place, knowing that the club was going to have debt and it hasn't been paid off and it's still there. So that comes back to weak governance. I think that's something that's on the table for reform. The FA at the moment doesn't have a chairman; it has an interim chairman. So the FA has sort of got a power vacuum anyway, with Greg Clark leaving. So that in itself raises a question. But with fan groups really putting pressure on the Football League, the Premier League, and the FA, if they get their reforms wrong and don't listen to fans' concerns, like the reduced squad sizes in League One and League Two are suicide. But salary caps aren't allowed. That is mental. With the amount of fixtures they have to play, with the size of their leagues, that is suicide. They won't have enough fit players to complete fixtures. That would be ridiculous. But salary caps have been on the agenda now since last season. From League One and League Two's perspective, now I think across the board it's on the agenda and needs to be discussed and needs to be an option. I think it will come to reality within 5 years, maybe less. Fan ownership, again, I think, is not an option. It's a reality within the next couple of years. Maybe as soon as the end of next season. Maybe as soon as next season, we may see these owners being forced to give up a stake of the club to fans. But no, the pandemic exposed the rampant overextension of finances and the rampant mismanagement. Absolutely exposed it. It didn't. It did exacerbate, but it actually exposed how badly run these clubs are. I'm having a tough time deciding on a Premier League side as an American relatively new to football. Any suggestions? Look outside the Premier League. Honestly, there's 92 clubs in the Football League pyramid that are fully professional. Plus, there's a whole host of clubs in the non-league that are fully professional. Obviously, I'm a Blackburn fan. We're in the Championship right now. Ex-Premier League winners of 1994-95 season. Thank you very much. But you've got 92 Football League clubs to choose from, plus non-league. There's professional clubs there as well. You just got to find what fits for you. It is a global game. I'm not against having global fans, not at all. But this is our domestic league we're talking about. This is it's a different style of fandom. We have promotion and relegation, so you could say I want to be a Fulham fan. They get relegated at the end of the season. They're playing in the Championship. What I will say is look at the history of each club in the Football League and the non-league. Look at the history of the clubs. Look at everything. Don't just go on, the Premier League since 92, or I'm a new fan. Because there is good football outside the Premier League. Very good, entertaining games. But just look at what feels right for you. Because you have no connection to any of these clubs, the 20 in the Premier League or the 72 in the Football League, plus those in the non-league, some of them have been in the Football League before. You just got to feel what's right for you. What do you like? Their colours? Do you like the history? A specific player? Look what's right for you and go with your gut. Basically, I wouldn't recommend any, to be honest, apart from I'm a Blackburn fan. I would say support Blackburn. We could use some new fans. We could always use a bit of extra support, but just research them. Look at the history of them. Look at the founding clubs of the Football League. Look at past champions in different eras. Look at some of the funky names, some of the players that have played for them. How many of the clubs have actual local talent playing in their system? Because you've got 92, Football League clubs to choose from. I mean, how many of Accrington Stanley's players are actually from Accrington? Have a look where Accrington is, by the way. Look at the amount of how many players have come through the youth system at these clubs, so have a connection to the community. How many players are English? How many players are Scottish, Welsh, Irish, overseas? That has a bearing on it as well. I would find a team with values. What's the team's motto all about? The history, everything. Got 92 professional teams in the 4 professional divisions. The National League actually is a fully professional division, actually, ironically enough. So you've got to find something where you find a connection, whether you've got a friend living in that location who may watch the odd game, or you've been there before. But when I try and get people interested in new sports, you've got to find a connection. You just don't go, oh, it's just because of the colour of the stadium. You've got to find a connection. You've got to find an interest, and you've got to learn the history of that team. Don't just go, oh, they've won X amount of Premier League titles or FA Cups. You've got to learn the history, even the dark times, the bad times, the times where they haven't won games, where they've lost and they've been relegated and they've struggled. And if you can live through that and the team is crap, you can obviously do very well and the team is good. As the friend of the master says, you've got to look at well, you could say choose a city you might want to visit one day. Yes, absolutely. But if you, let's say, did your family history and found you had relatives living in Lincoln City would be the team that you would want to look at. The stadium isn't great, but the club has got a decent history, or you might find you have family from Lancashire. What part of Lancashire? Preston, Burnley, Blackburn, Accrington, Morecambe, Fleetwood. There's a fair few professional clubs in Lancashire that aren't from Greater Manchester or Merseyside, historic from the old historical county. And some of them are founders of the Football League, by the way. Research the history of the Football League, you'll find Manchester United and Liverpool aren't founders. Newton Heath, the forebearers of Manchester United, were the founders. The team moved and changed colours, which is interesting. But look at the history of the clubs. There's 92 teams to choose from. You probably got some lovely weather. I don't know where you are in the US, but look at the history. Look at the connection with community. Look at the players, the Hall of Fame of players who've played, the notable players who've played, and look at how many of those players who are on the squad actually come from the town that they play. We're finding there's a lot of player movement, but look how many players they bring through. Like Crewe Alexandra, known for their youth policy and developing youth talent that goes on to bigger clubs. Find a team with the values, any connection can be a helping point. So some of the bigger cities like London have got loads of clubs. London and Manchester, Greater Manchester, have got a load of professional clubs. My surname is Southern Irish, but I've got family connections to the West Country, which is why I like Exeter and Yeovil as football clubs. My family actually supports Yeovil down in the West Country, and I've got connections to Liverpool, which is why parts of my family support Liverpool. Not that I'm a fan of them, and also to the Lancashire area, which is why I'm a Blackburn fan. But I've got connections in the West Midlands, like Walsall and Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton and Walsall, much better as a derby match, with a shocking Brummie accent. But I've also got connections with London, so Brentford. I like watching Brentford play. I'm not a fan of Brentford, but I like watching them play, and I wish them well. But you look at Greater London, the amount of professional teams in Greater London is ridiculous. Not just the Premier League, but League One, League Two, the Championship, the non-league. You've got Charlton Athletic, Crystal Palace, Brentford, Chelsea, Fulham. They're all within about 3 miles of each other. That's an interesting part of West London there. Tottenham, Arsenal, Barnet, Leyton Orient, West Ham, Millwall. Further afield, we've got Dagenham and Redbridge. Greater London's got a lot of professional teams in the football league structure. Great footballing history in London, but not a single. Yes, they are shown on live TV in the US. It's a shame that some of the clubs outside of those top 2 leagues don't get shown overseas much, which is where League One and League Two are discussing, salary caps, because they're not getting good TV deal, and they're not getting a fair share of the money that they did pre 1992. That's not gone down well with how the TV deal has been structured since 92. Pre 92 is a far more even share, and less clubs were having financial difficulties than they are now. But yes, no, there's a big market for the Premier League and Championship, partly because there's a lot of American money in the Premier League and the Championship, with a variety of clubs having American involvement as part owners or shareholders. but that's part of the argument is the American involvement in this, European Super League. 3 out of the 6 Premier League clubs have got American ownership. 5 of the 6 are foreign owned, and that hasn't gone down well. The Glazers aren't very popular with Man United fans. Gillette and Hicks used to own Liverpool, then Fenway Sports Group, which is owned by J.W. Henry, who owns the Boston Red Sox, bought Liverpool off them. So American ownership with United and Liverpool's been there for 15, 20 years, or investment. You've got, I think, Barnsley have American involvement. They play in the Championship. You've got American ownership involved with Swansea in the Championship. There's a lot of American money. You don't feel forced to go for one of the top 6 teams or the big 6. Do not feel forced because NBC are saying these are the games we're highlighting, because choose a team in any league. Don't feel forced because NBC are saying you have to support this team because these are the big teams. We're trying to say the big teams because, that's not how this works. That's the problem, that when you're trying to sell the English game, all 4 leagues, to the US, is the big 6. All the American fans seem to want to support the big 6. Trust me, there's 86 other clubs in the Football League, plus hundreds in the non-league who are also professional, semi-professional, amateur, who could deserve your support, probably deserve your support more. But no, if you look at your surname, do your family history, where the Hobbs family comes from, because I've got some friends who have the surname Hobbs, and find out what part of England or the UK the Hobbs family originates from. Originally, the cluster of surnames, and have a look at what professional clubs are in that area. It could be Norwich or Ipswich, for example, could be the 2 nearest professional teams to the Hobbs original. Before they went to the US, it could be Coventry, a very historical side, having their own issues right now with stadium and financial problems, but they were once a Premier League side. It could be you're from the West Country, for example, at which point you've got Plymouth Argyle, you've got Exeter City, you've got Yeovil Town, you've got your dad's old team, which used to play for Dorchester Town, you play in the non-league, you've got Weymouth, non-league, you've got Bournemouth, you've got Bristol City, Bristol Rovers, you've got Cheltenham Town. You want to go a bit further north in the West Country. So, yeah, there's a fair bit going on. I think the American model doesn't suit European sport. We've discussed that. The fact that the Glazers, especially, and FSG were key drivers behind this, with the history of the 2 clubs involved, Liverpool and Man United, it went down really poorly. The lack of consultation with fans. Not that fans are big fans of the Glazers anyway, but seriously, don't be forced to follow on the big 6, because Arsenal and Tottenham aren't really in the top 6 right now. Liverpool and Chelsea are fighting to get into Europe, and Man United and Man City are the only ones actually in the cemented European place. And Leicester could quite easily do Chelsea in the FA Cup. I think they actually have the squad to do that. I think the way NBC is how the Premier League sells its product, because where all the league, only 7 teams have ever won the Premier League. 6 of them are currently in the Premier League, and 1 of them is currently in the Championship. So look at the history of the Premier League. And ironically, Tottenham are less successful than these guys historically. So you've got to look at the history across the board. You've got to look at the history, absolutely. You cannot discount. Oh, I'm getting messages here. I'm getting love. What's the good? Oh, the girlfriend's sending me stuff. Yeah, the girlfriend's coming down tomorrow, so from Oxford. So I've got a fair bit. But yeah, the history is important. The connection with community is important, and the values of what that club represents is important. Don't feel that you have to support one of the big 6, because these big 6 aren't actually overly popular right now with everyone else. So that in itself, should be a consideration. The way NBC, I don't know how NBC obviously deals with I don't know how NBC obviously deals with the TV rights and who gets the most games shown. I have seen when I'm watching NHL broadcasts that even lesser Premier League ties, like say Wolves, Southampton, get advertised. So they do cover all the clubs get their fair share. I would think Fulham get a fair share of games in the US because they're American owned. I think that has something a little bit to do with it. But on an overall, I think every club should get its fair share, but they seem to try and sell certain games more than others. I think the product we have, I mean, West Brom beat Chelsea 5-2 the other day at Stamford Bridge, not at the Hawthorns. The Hawthorns is a nice little stadium, actually. I've actually done some work up in Castle Bromwich, where West Brom are from, up in the West Midlands, which is Birmingham. You will hear a lot of Brummy speak. I think they've got a fantastic, pretty solid stadium, and they've got a pretty vocal and solid and sizable fan base. And yeah, West Brom is a club with a rich history. Not as much success, I think, as the Baggies would like. Their nickname. You got to remember, if you want to learn about the history of the sport, you have to learn the nicknames of the clubs. You have to learn why they're called the Red Devils, why they're called the Black Cats. Even though they play at the stadium, are light. The irony of that. Middlesbrough, the Borough. Why do they play in the colours that they do? Why do they have the nicknames that they have? You have to look at their successes and their failures as well, and go from there. There's some great clubs who are playing outside the Premier League. Do not feel like the Premier League has to be where your club plays. I mean, my team has been in the Premier League for 6-7 seasons now. It is a depressing time to be a Blackburn fan because we've got poor ownership and we're middling in the Championship table. The Baggies will tell you they're Black Country, not Birmingham, but they're technically part of the West Midlands because of the borough considerations. Castle Bromwich is technically in the Black Country, yes, but it's part of the Greater Birmingham Metropolitan West Midlands conurbation. But I've got family originally from the Walsall and Dudley area, so technically, if I was going by my family history, my local club would be Walsall. Walsall. Oh yes. Solid fan base, solid club. I mean, the stadiums are old and is aging, but it's a solid club and a solid fan base regionally in the West Midlands. Their local derbies against Kidderminster. Kidderminster Harriers, Walsall, Wolverhampton. You've got obviously Birmingham City and Aston Villa, Coventry City. Competing. Leicester City if you want to go to the East Midlands, and Northampton Town if you really want to push the Midlands out to the east. But they're all competing for fans on a regional and a national level. Yeah, but I've had the same discussion about those who are new to rugby union, rugby league as well. It's firstly just watch the sport at all levels. You don't just focus on the Premier League and the Championship. You've got to look at League One and League Two. And unfortunately, the TV deal for overseas coverage is limited. And then your best bet is when the cup games are on. When the cup games are on, when the smaller lower league clubs are playing the bigger league clubs, that's a good place to start. The FA Cup, the League Cup, that's a good place to start watching. The playoff finals as well in May and end of April, well, May, because of the delayed start of the season. So next month, playoff finals are on. And this is what's been forgotten by this European Super League is the joy that we're having discussing the lower leagues. It's the same in Italy, it's the same in Spain, it's the same in France, same in Germany, and across Europe. You have the pyramid structure. You have promotion relegation. There's some big clubs playing in lower levels that were once champions of, the top league. So you have to bear that in mind. I love the history of looking at teams in the past when they won their trophies, when what leagues they played in. It's something that does get forgotten when we discuss football reform. Football governance is teams that were once at the top are now near the bottom. Like Bradford City were once a Premier League club. They're not at the moment, obviously, but they were in the Premier League for a couple. Barnsley were once a Premier League club, so people forget that. And Oldham Athletic and Swindon Town, founders of the Premier League. There you go. Oxford United once were barred from entering the Cup Winners' Cup because of the European ban on English clubs competing in Europe at the time, but they won the League Cup in 1990. So that you have to factor that into the situation. Is some clubs have won trophies that aren't in the top league right now, and so yeah, there is other. But yeah, that's something to consider. But it's nice to have like a new viewer who's new to a sport, and I can just go the pros and cons of the sport. The sport does need massive reform. That's what we can all agree on. There is no denying that the clubs and the league administrators, the whole system needs reform. It's come to. I used to have a Blackburn. Well, I've got several. I have several in my possession. This is one that's currently in my flat. My Premier League winning one is in my mum's storage unit. The other one is with my dad. Who's no longer with us. So that's it's currently in a coffin in the West Midlands in the Black Country. But yeah, I've supported Blackburn before the Premier League was even a thing. I can remember the first game I watched was on the TV. I think it was a cup game, and Blackburn happened to be playing, and I like the colour blue, and it sort of stuck. And within a few years, we won the Premier League, and then we got relegated, and then within a few years of that, we won the League Cup, and I had many a fun night watching Blackburn in what is now the Europa League and the Champions League in years past. I've had many the red and black, yes, the hideous away jersey, as I call it, because it I can't stand that red and black one. It's not a pleasant jersey. I'm not a fan of it. I never was. But you know, I have worn my jersey with pride and with disgust. Um, Oh no, it's fine. I mean, if it was the same, if you were asking, I want to get into rugby league or rugby union. Again, I would suggest they are very different, and there are differences, and a lot of Americans get confused between league and union. But if you're new to a sport, I mean, Colin Hendry, that blonde mullet. Um, yeah, Colin Hendry. Interesting character, Colin Hendry. Had issues with the drink and gambling, but a solid centre back and a proud national and club captain. Uh, I have. He was a brilliant club captain for us, brilliant centre back, and he was a brilliant national captain for Scotland. Very underrated centre back. Very underrated. Um, what I would call the end of the golden age of Scottish national football. But now they qualify for this year's Euros, so that makes up for 23 years of not having a tournament appearance. But yeah, no, because you're new to the sport, there's more than just the Premier League. 23 years of not playing international tournament football, I think. It's fine, and I don't count the Nations League as a major tournament, but it's finally. Oh, yeah, we did, because we had a local lad called Jack Walker, who was a businessman who loved the club dearly and had seen the club in the old. We always went out the football league in 10 years before I was born. So in the 10 years from 1979 of the 13 years until the Premier League was formed, we went from the bottom division or the second bottom division to the top division. And then within 3 years of that, we won the top division for the first time in God knows how long. The club had been through a very, very, very lean period. So within 13 years, we've gone from basically almost getting relegated. I think was it to the old fourth division or the conference? The stadium was in a shocking state of repair. The team were poor, and then Jack Walker comes along as a local lad who had made his money in industry and bought the club and took us back to where the club should have been as founders of the Football League at the top of the pyramid. And then he passed away, and then things went a bit squiffy. But we were owned by the fans at one point until the Venkies took over. We were a well run club, mid table, sometimes a bit better. FA Cup semi final in there, League Cup victory in there, but at the same time, we didn't have the funding to compete against the likes of your Chelseas and your Man Uniteds when it came to the transfer market. We would develop players and then they would be taken off us by Chelsea. Damien Duff, prime example. We developed him, Chelsea bought him. It's how it goes. We had some great players. Oh yeah, Sutton and Shearer. Sutton and Shearer too. Well, I mean, Chris Sutton ruined his England career by some of the things he stated, where he'd rather play for his club than his country. But as a player and as a striker, both in England and in Scotland, he's actually scored more goals than Shearer, but not in the Premier League. But Chris Sutton, as a player, brilliant. As he played for Chelsea as well at one point. As a pundit, as a manager, not so good. But that was a strike partnership where the players got on with each other as well. And for 3 or 4 seasons was one of the best striker duos in Europe. And you had Mike Newell as the third striker if one of them got injured or suspended. So we had a pretty lethal forward group. I think Shearer is the better pundit and the better player, better leader as well, more respected within the game, and he's given a lot back to the game as well. I wouldn't say he was the best player we had. He's just our best goal scorer. I think there were some really good players in that squad in 94, 95. And in the 2002 Cup League Cup winning squad, we had York and Cole up front. So yeah, we've had some pretty good players over the years. At the moment, we're not in the league we should be, and we've not got the ownership we should have. The fans again own that club again. That's my personal opinion. Unfortunately, money spoke in the mid 2000s, and the Walker Trust, which is basically a fan led, where his assets, his inheritance was he put all his family were on the board. They just went, we cannot compete financially to get up the table again to compete against the likes of your Chelseas and your Man Uniteds with all the money. But we were a very well run club at the time. Much like Exeter City today, we live within our means. Oh, well, of course we will. We're the first club to have the FA Cup won 5 times. We have got the original trophy. It's actually donated to the Football Museum. But we were the first team to get a replica of. Well, actually, we kept the original. The original FA Cup trophy is ours. We just donated to the Football Museum, but it's technically our property because the FA gave it to us. We were the first team to win the FA Cup 3 years in a row. We won it 4 times in I think 8 years or 5 years or something. So we have that. It's part of our history. But in the 70s, the club reached the real low point in its history and nearly went out the Football League. So in the decade before I was born, it was a mess. It got to the point where the ownership was so bad, the team were poor, the stadium was crumbling, the attendances were non-existent, money dried up, and then Jack Walker came along. And people, oh yeah, we won the league because we bought it. No, we took a few seasons to actually. The season before the Premier League started, we were 16th. It did take a while to get the success, and then we couldn't sustain it afterwards. Favorite era? Well, I've been watching football since 1990. Oh God, I think I was 2 years old when I first watched a football match. So 91, early 92, the season before the Premier League. So Leeds United won the title that year. The season before the Premier League kicked off was the first season I remember watching, and we finished 16th. Blackburn finished 16th that final Division 1 season. Within 3 years, we're Premier League champions. Much like Leicester, within a very short time, we've gone from mediocrity to winning the title, but we couldn't sustain the success. Shearer going to Newcastle was the catalyst of that squad being broken up, which is a shame. But the channel's going well. obviously the channel's birthday was yesterday. I didn't do a video because I was actually spent after work. I had a long day yesterday and was really tired, and I just zoned out. And I had to help my neighbour with a few things, so I didn't really get around to it. And I just was shattered. So I've got a lot to do this evening and tomorrow after work as well. But yeah, no, the channel's not where I want it to be, but at the same time, I'm quite happy with the subscribers and all that. But growth has slowed. But I've worked out this is a hobby. Like if it was to make money, fine, good. But at the same time, is what it is. Favorite era of English football you followed? I would say the '90s was more fun. I would say the '90s was more fun, but I've waned on football, and I think that's the thing. I think yeah, I've waned a little bit in my joy of the sport. So it's not my favourite sport anymore. It hasn't been for quite some time. And there's videos on the channel that I list my favourite sports, and football is not in the top three. Not by a long shot. It's not even close. Not even close. If I was to review it now, it might not even make the top 10. But I cover it because I know there's a big fan base in this country and globally for the sport, so I cover it. Right, let's have a look. Jordan Rhodes, yeah, he was one of our players once. Jordan Rhodes played for Blackburn once. Sheffield Wednesday, I mean, yeah, Sheffield Wednesday's been badly managed for years since they got relegated from the Premier League in the, I think, 2000 season. They've been mismanaged for a long time. They struggled in the Championship. They've struggled in League One. They shouldn't be where they are, but that's down to Milan Mandaric and some of the financial dealings there, administration, just poor ownership off the field. But then on the field, the team they put on the field isn't good enough either. But that's the competitive nature of the sport. Tranmere Rovers with Aldridge and Pat Nevin, and Aldridge managing them as well to the League Cup final all those years ago. Tranmere in the '90s were a good side, and the early 2000s as well. They were a very, very good side for the level they played at, and could have possibly made higher up the league ladder. They've got a solid fan base. They are the forgotten team of Merseyside after Liverpool and Everton, but they have a very, very solid fan base and should not be discounted down the line if they get the right kind of investment, the right kind of ownership. Again, they could quite easily go up the league ladder like they should. And some good players have played for Tranmere over the years and be developed by Tranmere. The fact that La Liga's chairman has announced that the La Liga clubs involved will not be punished is a joke. But that's La Liga for you. They wanted to take games to the US in the regular season, which went down like a sack of shit. Someone put a bag of shit on the doorstep and lit it on fire. That doesn't surprise me from La Liga. They know that Madrid, Barcelona, and Atletico are their big clubs, but they're forgetting that Levante and Athletic Bilbao have never been relegated from La Liga. They are big clubs in Spain. The fact they're pandering to the big two, Atletico not so much because Atletico have been outside La Liga in the top flight before, but they're pandering to the other big two is a sorry state of affairs. It allows the door to be opened again for a further breakdown and a further attempt. But we'll see what happens. On the side of, will Leicester keep their top 3 or top 5 players? Yes. They've got the right philosophy. They've got the right manager. They've got the right player development, the right squad. They've invested their money from Harry Maguire very wisely in a new training facility and academy. So there is that. I think yes, we'll see what happens, but I do think they will definitely be in the mix years going forward. Football's still my favourite sport, just ahead of NFL. Again, football hasn't necessarily covered itself in glory over the last, I'm going to say, year and a half or so, couple of years. It hasn't, the PR disaster that has been hasn't gone down well. But it's what it is. But yeah, no, Tranmere in the 90s and the early 2000s was a good side to watch for the level they were playing at. It is a shame where they've ended up and falling out of the Football League a couple of years ago, but they got back into the Football League. But yeah, they again on and off the field it wasn't working. And with the way things are, with how cutthroat the Championship and League One and League Two are to a certain extent, it's difficult. Where will Messi go? That's open for debate. His contract is up. It'll be interesting whether he goes back to Argentina or he dabbles his hand in another league like the Premier League or retires. I think he wants to play at the next World Cup, so he wants to keep playing. Whether he stays at Barcelona, I don't know. It all depends on Ronald Koeman and the discussions he's had. He encouraged him to stay last time, but he still handed in a transfer request. So we'll see what happens with Messi. Tebas is calling for control and spending for PSG and Man City. Yeah, I think the salary caps are going to be on the table. I think UEFA have to consider them, and the domestic leagues have to consider them as well. We've discussed that. But again, it's open for debate what happens because La Liga, I'm not surprised they're being very conciliatory to Barcelona and Real Madrid, Atletico to a certain extent. At the same time, it's this weakness in governance, but the Spanish FA can overrule La Liga easily. They did for the taking games overseas, and we'll have to see the reaction from other players and other clubs when La Liga is not considering punishing the three that wanted to leave and set up the rival league. So we'll have to see what happens. Atletico and Real are in a battle for La Liga. We'll have to see. Do I? I hope Messi finally wins an international honour other than the Olympics. It would be nice. That's why when people compare him and Ronaldo to Pele, Pele wins every time. Different era, I know, but he won multiple World Cups and multiple Copa Americas. So Messi and Ronaldo's won 1 Euros and Messi's won nothing at international level. Club level, yes, brilliant. You cannot argue what they've done at club level. It's translating it to international level. That's the problem. And that's where you can judge players. And plus, Pele played his entire professional career apart from his stint in the US with I think it was Santos in Brazil. So while Messi is a one-club man at this point, I think he wants to keep playing. Whether it's Barcelona, we'll have to wait and see. He could possibly play for free. He's got enough money. It's whether his style of play would suit other leagues, and whether other clubs actually can afford his salary, considering the financial constraints on football and the discussion about salary caps, etc., and the optics of that. So I think Barcelona and Real Madrid will come back onto the top of the football in this decade. They're still at the top of football. I would think then it's interesting because they have presidential elections and the fans have a big say on how clubs are run. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Barcelona and Real Madrid with their club presidents and the directions the clubs take. I think it's a difficult one. But I remember the Galacticos era at Real Madrid where they couldn't win anything. Lots of big name players, lots of overspend, which is big felt today. And Florentino Perez was at the club at that time doing stuff. And they went through a lot of managers and they went a lengthy period of time where they were just all over the place. I think, yeah, it was a bit of both. Obviously, growing up, I think it was in Rosario. He grew up in Argentina. I think there was some youth scouting there, and then he went over. Brought through the academy. I remember his debut in Europe against Chelsea, and he tore Chelsea to pieces. But again, and that was 2004, 2005. Again, would he have had as many goals and assists in the Premier League or the Bundesliga? That is up for debate. That is up for debate whether he would have been as successful in another league. The fact that Barcelona kept him, I think Barcelona knew what they had in the player. Other players have come and gone around him who are equally as talented, in my view. Like Luis Figo's, your Figos, your Samuel Eto's, Henri's been there, equally as talented and skillful different style of player. Would he have been as successful as he played in the Premier League? That's open for debate. He hasn't challenged himself in the Premier League, so we'll never know. Unless he signs for a Premier League club. I know it's near the end of his career, but unless he decides to, he wants to play at the World Cup, I think. Yeah, well, we don't know if he's leaving or retiring a Barcelona player. If he's leaving and going as a free agent, then anyone can sign him. If he decides to stick it out Barcelona for another year or two, the team is rebuilding and Koeman's only on a 2-year contract. Whether Koeman's going to be the manager long term is another thing. It's open for debate. But here's the thing, because Barcelona haven't pulled out of the Super League yet and haven't made a statement yet, they're going to put it towards their members, which is the fans. And if the fans vote resoundingly no against the proposal, then we'll see what happens. I think the idea is dead. I think there has to be a change. The fact Atletico Madrid decided to pull out, I think they were afraid of losing some of their key players and losing Simeone as a manager. And they feared the consequences. They have less money. Who's still in it? Juve, Real Madrid, and Barcelona. And Agnelli's come out and said it's dead in the water. So what Florentino Perez is saying, I have no idea. He's clutching at straws. I think everyone else has given up on the idea. It was very amateur hour at the best of times, and it was only, I think, Agnelli at Juve who spoke with the playing group and the manager in Andrea Pirlo, but they're fourth in Serie A. They may not win anything this season. So, and their Champions League history recently isn't great either. So there's things to discuss going forward. This Super League is historical clubs who have been very successful are worried about being less successful. They want to keep all the money for themselves because they know they sell the product, but they want to keep others from that closed shop, and that could grow the product more. When you have, well, I've done a history on Borussia Mönchengladbach from Germany. They won I think what is now the UEFA Cup and the Cup Winners' Cup. They won 6 or 7 European trophies in the 70s. They're not obviously strong now in Germany, but the 70s was the Mönchengladbach's decade. That's when Bayern Munich started to become the force they are now. Yes, he did have he had issues to do with his teenage years. He did have some health problems. They obviously knew that he was a good youth player. But we'll see what happens. What punishment do I think the Premier League clubs will get, if any? It's going to be interesting. I've discussed earlier on the live stream the possibilities on the table. None of them are concrete, but expulsion from the Premier League is an option that is being considered by the other 14 clubs. And that is less likely to happen now that these clubs have pulled out, but it's on the table. And they haven't just discounted that. I most likely would see transfer embargoes and points deductions would be more likely. Most likely a points deduction. I think they'll all get the same amount of points deduction. Maybe Liverpool, Man United may get heavier points deductions than City and Chelsea. Arsenal and Tottenham may get heavy deductions as well. That's in the short term. In the medium to long term, I think fan ownership is going to be a thing with the 50+1 rule. I think salary caps are on the table as well, and that will aid the other clubs in the Football League pyramid and restrict these clubs from doing this again. And of course, the Americans are very well used to salary caps because of how American sports work. So if they don't want to get on board with that, then there's a real hypocrisy there. But at the same time, with the league's announcement, I don't know. But there's a growing call for action to be taken. If no action's taken, that's going to go down really badly with fans. Really badly. Oh yeah, it would. It would definitely make it very interesting. And then you would see how good a caliber these managers are when they're starting behind the ball, where teams above them have start on 0 and they start on -30. It would make it very interesting to see where they end up and how they coach their teams. They could get deductions this year. The season isn't finished yet. We've got 2 cup finals to play involving 3 out of the 6 teams. it will be interesting. The League Cup finals this weekend involving Spurs, Man City, and of course the FA Cup finals coming in May with Leicester playing Chelsea. Now, there have been talks of throwing them out of the. They're still on the table, just throwing these teams out of the Champions League if they're still in it. That includes Man City and Real Madrid, and I think Chelsea as well, out of Europe. So we'll see what happens. It's an ever evolving story. It's been quieter today than it was yesterday and the day before, but it's still evolving. It's slowed somewhat. I do think, however, that punishments are coming. If with all the language that came before the withdrawal of 9 of the 12 clubs, if UEFA and the domestic FAs are weak in their response now, it doesn't sit well. It won't sit well. Kick them out and put the teams back in. Well, they haven't breached any rules with any illegible players or anything like that, or forfeited a match. So that's kind of, again, would be in breach of the Football League and the FA's rules when it comes to the cup competitions. So we'll see what happens, because they're cup competitions, they're not domestic league. The domestic league is different. That's where the Premier League can get involved. The FA and the Football League, they're not members of the Football League technically, because they're members of the Premier League, and the FA is a cup competition open to all, and they haven't actually breached any rules on those particular cup competitions. So I can't see them getting kicked out, because that would be then the FA and the Football League in breach of their own rules. So in that regard, I think the games get played. However, will the winners of those two tournaments be allowed to take their European places next season? Now, if Leicester beat Chelsea, they're in the Champions League qualification stages, but they could also be there on league finishing position anyway. Depending on who wins out of City and Tottenham goes into the Europa League qualification by virtue of winning that trophy, regardless. But league position for City is going to be title, as we know. It'll be interesting to see if any points deductions are done at end of season play, or for the start of next season, or if they are thrown out. If they are thrown out, that means Sheffield United, for example, are unrelegated from the Premiership. So it creates a few headaches. As things currently stand, Sheffield United are relegated from the Premiership, and Norwich are going to get promoted in one of the automatic places. That is confirmed. However, if they were then to deduct points or take all their points off and we'll throw them out the league, Sheffield United would stay up as 16th or 14th or whatever it is. And then you would have to put 6 teams in, which then affects the playoffs. And there are permutations that the EFL and Premier League and the FA would have to work out. This is why I think it's point deductions from next season, which would be most likely, or at end of season play. At which point, Sheffield United is still relegated. And therefore, Spurs and Arsenal may be involved in a relegation battle, depending on how West Brom, Fulham, Newcastle, Brighton, and other teams near the bottom play. Could determine that. But we'll see what happens. If the 14 clubs all agree to kick them out the league, then Sheffield United aren't relegated. Neither are Fulham or West Brom or Brighton or Newcastle, whoever ends up in the bottom 3. But then it comes on to the Football League. What leagues do they put them in? They put them in the Championship? Do they put them in League One, League Two? Do they not accept them in the Football League and put them in the non-league? And that's where it gets really difficult if we go down the really strong end of the thing. I'm going points deduction. I'm going for possibly end of this season, at the end of play. So Man City may win the title on the field, but may not win the title when it comes to points, because they've had points deducted for breach of Premier League rules. Or we see points deductions to start next season, most likely, and possibly transfer bans, and maybe a European ban for those clubs, which would then say, well, who do we put in the Champions League and Europa League in their place? Leicester could do that by winning the FA Cup and their virtual league finishing position anyway, and West Ham, in regards to their finishing position, again, because of how they played this season. So would they be two of our 3 automatic Champions League places? Aston Villa could be in there, Wolves, Everton. These are the clubs that will benefit if the other 6 are banned from competition. Yeah, Norwich are definitely coming back. They are promoted. It's whether they are champions. They're not champions of the championship yet. Yes, two guy, favourite player. Underrated midfielder. Deadly from open play or set play with either foot. He was 2-footed. Brilliant player. Um, Also a Rangers legend as well. And yes, he did play wearing this particular jersey. Yes, Arsenal and Spurs, I think, are the weakest of the big six when we discuss how things are going. Arsenal and Tottenham aren't playing well this season. They're mid-table sides. Tottenham are racked with debt. Arsenal have got debts. They are more structured. They are structured debts to do with the stadium rebuild, which they are still paying off in instalments. So Arsenal are in actually a decent financial position, ironically. On the field, not so good, but off the field, yes, they've got debt, but it's structured. They know what they're doing with it, and they are paying the stadium off. I think they have actually paid the stadium. I think it's the interest on the stadium. Spurs, I think, are the most risk of points deduction and player exodus and financial problems. They are literally one step away from administration. I am not joking. You look at the value of the ownership group, ENIC, which is a company which owns Spurs, and the value of the owner, and then you look at the debt the club has. That is administration all over it, all over it. And they are at risk of having player exodus as well. They've just sacked Mourinho. The rumours behind Mourinho's sacking obviously are there. He refused to take training over in protest at the proposed European Super League. And people go, oh, Mourinho's done the Premier League era. No, or the Premier League. No, he's not done as a manager. I think my respect for Mourinho has gone up. I don't like him. I respect him. He wins trophies. His Tottenham side is not built to win trophies. You look at it, it's failed. Their closest attempt was 2016 to 2018, and they failed in those 3 years, those 3 seasons. 2016, they were neck and neck with Leicester, and they ended up finishing third. 2016, 2017, same again, came up short. 17-18, that FA Cup semi-final, they're winning it, cruising to the final, and they lose 2-1 to an average Man United side who then lost the worst FA Cup final in history to Chelsea. But that's there. Was it 2019? But they had a period between 2016 and 2019 where they should have won something and haven't. They have a chance this weekend against Man City. I don't think they do it. I cannot see them doing it. If those clubs get kicked out, West Ham, then it's Leicester, then it's Everton, I think then it's Aston Villa, and then it's Leeds. Would be that kind of. West Ham would be champions, Leicester would be second. I think Everton would be third, Leeds would be fourth, Aston Villa fifth, or the other way round, something like that. It makes it a very interesting final Premier League table. And yeah, Tottenham, I think, are the most risk of going into administration anyway. And they're not qualifying unless they win the League Cup. They're not qualifying for Europe as things stand. So they need to win this League Cup. If they can't do that, I can't see Tottenham being able to sustain the squad they have and the losses. Even when fans are allowed back in, they are hemorrhaging cash, and they haven't won anything under this current ownership with the current chairman in Levy in charge. They've come up short so many times that it's they've tried to bet the farm. Yes, they brought Harry Kane through the ranks, and yes, they've developed Dele Alli and other players. However, they still can't get silverware under this current setup. 2008 was the last time they won silverware. They haven't been successful for a long period of time. They've been close, but you don't get medals in football for finishing second or third unless you're qualifying for Europe. They haven't won anything. They've lost the worst Champions League final I can remember, and they choked it again when Leicester won the league. So I don't see how this current setup at Tottenham is working. The playing squad's unbalanced. They're going through managers very quickly, and they're not getting any results. And the whole Gareth Bale situation, that's 300 grand a week they've got to spend on his wages alone, which is an issue in itself. So I don't know how you would work that out really, with Tottenham. They're the ones in the worst trouble. Arsenal are fair to middling. But that's how things stand, in my opinion, if we're looking on a footballing standpoint. Arsenal and Tottenham will not be competing for trophies anytime soon. The fact Tottenham have a chance somehow to win a League Cup final, that's great. That's cool. They need to get that first trophy. They've sacked the manager beginning of the week. So I don't know what they do. They're on interim for a couple of games, and then they're going to have to look for a new manager. I think Levy's on. If they lose that League Cup final and don't qualify for Europe, Levy's sacked. I think he should go now anyway. He's caused enough damage. Odious little man that he is. But Arsenal, it shows how good a manager Wenger was to win those FA Cups a few seasons back. It shows how good Wenger was to win those FA Cups when they hadn't won anything for a long time. He managed to get some silverware at a club that was just so inconsistent. It still he qualified for Europe every single season. Only I think one season he qualified for Europa League, and the rest of them he got Champions League qualification. Wenger and Alex Ferguson, it shows how good managers they were, and be careful what you wish for when they go. There were calls for Wenger to go years before he decided to go, I'm done now. And now Arsenal fans wish he was still there, because he got the most out of players that otherwise other managers have failed with. Now, Arteta, I think, is going about things the right way. He's obviously got to develop his own philosophy. He played under Wenger. He's played at the club. But Unai Emery was just... They got hammered in that Europa League final. And, yeah, he won an FA Cup in there. Oh, Arteta won the FA Cup. Arteta's got an FA Cup to his name. It hasn't worked this season with them. Unai Emery got them to a cup final, and they were battered and embarrassed. Oh no! If Wenger was still there, I think he would have had very strong words with the ownership saying no. Wenger, he made the club better than what they were. That invincible seasons will stick with me forever. With every football fan, you cannot beat that. Wenger brought the club success that it craved, and then he kept them competitive when the club shouldn't have been. He then still won silverware with an uncompetitive team on paper. In reality, they overachieved under him for the second half of his time there. I'm not an Arsenal fan, but watching them play at their best under Wenger left you mesmerised. It's a shame they didn't win that Champions League final. If they won that Champions League final against Barcelona, it would have been a different story. I honestly believe that for Arsenal. And Messi may not have had the career he had. Barcelona went, we've got to rip it all up. We've lost to Arsenal. And Barcelona had to play to win that game. That's how good Arsenal were in the 90s and the early 2000s. They were that good a side that even on a bad season, they would still challenge for trophies and be no lower than third, sometimes fourth. And they would still be competing in cup finals, League Cup finals, Champions League final. They were that good a side. Now they're lucky to be at the top end of mid-table. They really haven't done well since leaving Highbury. They've got those FA Cups in there, and Wenger is the most successful FA Cup manager ever. However, in saying that, be careful what you wish for, because fans were calling for Wenger's head for the last 10 years he was there. As the team started to decline, they were calling for his head, and he still got them Champions League football. He still made them as competitive as possible, and that team overachieved with him as manager in the second half of his reign, and he still won them silverware towards the end, and fans were still not satisfied. That lies with the ownership. That lies with the owner going, I want to build a new stadium. That lies with the owner mismanaging the transfer market. That lies with Kroenke and his investors. It does. It's not Wenger's fault. It's not Arteta's fault they are where they are. He still won them silverware in his first season in charge, however. This season's been a much tougher go of things. I still have faith in Arteta being a very good manager come the end. I wouldn't say fans are experts, but be careful what you wish for. When you get used to success, it's kind of difficult not to have it. It's like heroin; it's addictive. when like Leicester, the fans knew that was possibly a one-off. Now it's looking likely that it's not. But they've stuck with the same style of play and the same philosophy and the same development plan. They're a well-run club. The fans aren't expected to win everything every season. They are happy that their club is actually doing really well for the first time in a long time and having sustained success and being competitive, being good. And actually, they could win if they win the FA Cup this season. This is the best era in Leicester's history, apart from those League Cup wins in the 90s. This is putting Leicester back into the mix of things. And people rate Brendan Rodgers as a manager. I do. I think his time at Swansea went well. He developed his ideas at Swansea, goes to Liverpool, and his ideas didn't sit well with that Liverpool squad, but that was also partly due to the ownership. He goes to Celtic, and yeah, it's a weaker league, yes, less competitive. You've still got to beat what's in front of you. You've still got to motivate the players every week to be hungry for that next trophy, that next trophy, that next trophy. He did that. He learned his lessons in Scotland, comes back down south, and he's in a cup final. And I think Leicester want to keep him long term. If they win that cup final, that then changes things. And also, I will say this: Diego Simeone stated of Leicester, it was the toughest European tie as Atletico manager he's ever faced. He was in that quarter final a couple of seasons ago against Leicester, when it's the toughest quarter final or toughest home and away. And that was on the record. Simeone said that was the toughest European tie I've ever had to manage. Tactically, toughest. And Simeone is a hard man to please, and he was actually quite impressed by that Leicester performance. So they've got the right culture there, they've got the right philosophy, and it's paying dividends. And there's a reason why I think they will stick around the top 5, top 6, be in the European hunt every season for the next 5-6 years. I think looking at this, as I say, financially, Tottenham are in big trouble. Big trouble. And we'll see what happens with Spurs, but they're in serious trouble. Serious trouble. And I could see them being forced to sell players to cover losses. And I can see the fans' anger at Spurs as well, with it, especially with Levy and the ownership. They're not happy at all. And rightly so. It's a difficult one. Some of the decisions that have been made since Daniel Levy's been chairman do baffle me. And some of the decisions that the ownership has made as well. But they're the team. I think they're the Premier League side that went for this European Super League that is the most desperate, because they can't win anything. They come close, but then they fall apart. They fall apart in big games, and there does appear to be a problem with the playing group of attitudes. There does, but look, I'm an outside observer. I have no dog in this race, so my viewpoint is outside looking in, but it's not a positive atmosphere. I think it's personally myself. And they've had some brilliant players over the years. Brilliant players. They have got history at that club. But was the stadium rebuild necessary? They needed success first before they built that stadium to build upon. They've got no success for years, and they are what they are. They are what they are. Pochettino came up short. He, couldn't get them over the hump. Mourinho comes in, doesn't get much better, and they got Mason in charge, the interim. He's got a very short window, to get the team ready for a cup final, the biggest game of their season, because this is their biggest game of the season. And if they get battered by Man City, that's his first game in charge. How is that going to build confidence? I wouldn't even call them Big Six, because only for a couple of seasons have they actually been relevant in the Champions League, Europa League conversation on a regular basis. Since 2008, yes, they've been in the Champions League conversation. They haven't won anything. They haven't won anything, and this is the problem. The only thing they're winning is the debt race. Who can have the most unstructured, unsubstantiated debt, and that's Tottenham. They haven't won anything. So I don't know what Spurs fans want out of this, apart from, I don't know, decent ownership. If you were a free agent and you could go to any club right now, which club would you go to? Is it the philosophy? Is it the atmosphere? Is it the team unity? Is it the positivity from the fan base? Or is it winning trophies is the only goal? Because I do think you have to fit into a side and get on with your teammates and have a positive dressing room where there's a sort of unity. And Tottenham, you don't get that. You get really indifferent. We'll have to see what happens. But I think Tottenham are in real big danger of entering administration. I'm not joking. What have you missed, Jason? We've discussed a lot of things, including other sports, and the positive and negative side effects of, you know, what happens with the big six in the Premier League. But yes, club debt needs to be looked at. Club ownership needs to be looked at. And in regards to Tottenham especially, on the outside looking in, they're not in a healthy position. They're in a real weak position. So we'll see what happens, really. Personally, looking at it from the outside in, they're not in a good place. I've got friends who are Spurs fans. Oh yeah, I mean, well, to be fair, Andy Cole and Teddy Sheringham hated each other, but as professionals on the field, they knew how to get the job done. Fergie was a brilliant guy at getting egos to work. This is where Man United overperformed for many years under Ferguson. Since Fergie's gone, it's been a shambles. Since Wenger's gone, it's been a couple of seasons of up and down with Arsenal. So you've got to be, if you have that committed, strong leadership and have faith in a manager for a long, like Eddie Howe at Bournemouth was the longest serving Football League manager until he resigned. And he got that team to overachieve in the last season. Last season it didn't work out, but they ran out of steam. But players loved playing for him. And that is the key thing there is, talent gets you out. You can have an all-star team and win nothing. The Galacticos era at Real Madrid, that was a very negative dressing room with lots of big egos that the coaches just couldn't deal with. What else can I say? You look at the Galacticos era at Real Madrid. There was periods of Barcelona couldn't win stuff as well. I went through lean patches, and again, it was too many big egos and managers not being able to control dressing room. Oh no, this is the problem. Guardiola's a big ego himself, and you could argue that Man City's talent will only get them so far. And it'll be interesting to see how long Pep sticks around in Manchester. But Brendan Rodgers, I think, Leicester has the right ethos and the right philosophy, and seems to be a very positive club, whereas the other big clubs in England, even outside the big six, there's a lot of ego. I mean, Wolves have a good philosophy and a very happy dressing room. Nuno Santo Espirito. Nuno has got a great culture at Wolves. David Moyes seems to be a happy man at West Ham, whereas at Sunderland it was a nightmare. But at West Ham, David Moyes has got a happy dressing room. Same with Ancelotti at Everton. Klopp to Liverpool as well. It seems to be a much. I would say this season there's been some stress on Liverpool, but Klopp has made Anfield a happy dressing room. There's a bit more. I think Solskjaer is doing things the right way at Man United now. It has taken time, but he talks to the players like adults, not children. He's been on the end of a Fergie spray. He knows what angry management does and singling out players does. It's a collective responsibility. I think Solskjaer is the right guy for Man United. A lot of Man United fans don't agree with that, but I think Solskjaer is a man's manager. He can get the best out. He's getting the best out of Pogba, and even then, it's a hit and miss with Pogba. It depends what Pogba turns up. Pogba is a disruptive. Lingard's out the dressing room. It's changed the culture within that dressing room. He's getting the best out of Luke Shaw, which no other manager since he was at Southampton has been able to do, since Pochettino, ironically. You know, he's given the confidence to Maguire to be the leader. But Maguire's left a happy dressing room in Leicester and gone to a fractious dressing room in Man United that's taken time to rebuild the relationships. But Solskjaer comes across as a guy who's much like Klopp, very relaxed, very calm, doesn't get Rodgers, Solskjaer. Ancelotti seems to be a bit stern, like a schoolmaster, but at the same time, players respect him. Look at his record at every club he's coached. Everton is, I think, the toughest challenge he's had. Yes, Leicester can win it again. Absolutely. They've got the right philosophy. They've got the right culture there. They've got the talent as well. But the ownership really seems to respect the community around Leicester. There's the fans have bought in. The manager's the right guy there. They've got the right balance in the playing squad. They've got a brand new facility that they invested the money wisely. Just didn't throw it out on players. They developed players. I think Leicester, yes, they can. I do. And I wouldn't, have anything against them if they won again. I would actually be quite happy that if they were to win a second title. I think the FA Cup is possibly a catalyst for that. And if they do win the FA Cup, I think they're the right. I think Chelsea, Leicester should have been the semi-final. Southampton should have been the Man City semi-final, and Southampton, Leicester should have been the final. But I do think Leicester are the right team to beat Chelsea. I generally do. I think Chelsea's form's stuttering. I think, yeah. Oh yeah, Vardy's going to obviously retire, but I do think they've planned for that. They are prepared for that. Vardy, could have gone elsewhere. He could have moved outside Leicester and gone to a bigger club. If you call it a bigger club, he could have gone elsewhere. And he's being paid less to stay at Leicester than he would have got, let's say, at Man United or Chelsea or Liverpool. Leicester are a breath of fresh air. West Ham are a breath of fresh air this season. Aston Villa are a breath of fresh air under Dean Smith. Wolves under Nuno. I like the way they play. I like the culture these clubs have. And, the dressing rooms seem happier places. Oh, yeah, John McGinley should have also played for Scotland more than I. Yeah, absolutely. There's players who should have had longer or more international caps or longer international careers. No. No. I'm going to say no on that one. I think Tony Mowbray is the right guy to be managing the club, but I don't. No, I mean we're not in the same league in actual terms or in real terms. Like I would love to see Blackburn back in the Premier League. It's something I would love to see. Could it happen? We need to be more consistent. Absolutely. Will it happen? Possibly. But the Championship is what it is, and we have a lot of debt. So fan ownership model, I'm liking the sounds of it. Since the Venkies have taken over, this is the most stable period we've had since the current ownership took over. Is with Tony Mowbray in charge, and the team is where it is. We're mid-table in the bottom half of the mid-table in the Championship. We're not making playoffs. We're not getting relegated. We're just middling at the moment, which is a shame. The last couple of seasons, we've had some very strong starts. We've been on the edge of playoffs, and then we fade away. I think the festive period did us. The festive period did for us this season, which is a shame. We've got some good young talented players. No, against it. It'll kill Scottish football completely, and they'll get battered every week. Yeah. And with what's happened with the European Super League, I can't see that going down well with Scottish football fans either. This idea has been on the table for 25 years. You take them out of Scottish football, you kill Scottish football. This is this year's the first tournament they qualified since World Cup '98. So it's the fact this is coming fresh off the back of the European Super League debate. Don't do it. For the love of God, don't do it. You've just killed football north of the border. If you do that, you've just killed it. Well, Aberdeen, Hearts, Hibs, Motherwell, Livingston, they can't carry what you lose with Celtic and Rangers leaving. You would the money would just dry up straight away. Kill the league. Kill it. Absolutely kill it. And if that is even on the table, that's just as bad as the European Super League argument. Dutch Eredivisie and Belgian Pro League merger will go ahead. That's a difficult one because you've got the French Walloon population, like Standard Liège, Charleroi. You'll find resistance there. And Holland and Belgium have a very complicated history anyway. That would be a difficult sell. Very difficult sell. It's both been on the table. Eddie Howe, Crystal Palace or Celtic, which is better for him to go to? I think Palace. He's a young manager who wants to coach in the best league, and I don't think Celtic is. Celtic's a bit of a tyre fire at the moment. What's going on north of the border with Celtic in Scotland? Palace, they want to go up the league, not down it. I think Eddie Howe would be a good challenge for him, as is all the time he's been at Bournemouth. It would be a very good challenge for him as a young English manager going into an established Premier League club. I think that would be a mid-table club that wants to go up the ladder. Palace, I think, would be a better fit. I do. I think Celtic, they would expect to win trophies, and while he's had a very solid managerial career so far, I think Palace is where he needs to go to learn more. He would learn more lessons at Palace than at Celtic, and I think as a young up-and-coming manager, he's had a good reputation behind him. Players want to play for him, and that would probably entice such a Wilfried Zaha to stay. If a young, driven manager who really has a positive attitude and is very calm, he doesn't get irate in interviews, he's very calm, well-spoken, could have that influence on a Wilfried Zaha, for example, or to stay and then encourage other players that get on with Wilfried Zaha to join the club. Passionate fan base. They used to be a yo-yo team. They're not anymore. When they sell that ground out, they make noise. And I think it'd be more suiting his talents. There's talented players there, and he knows the Premier League at the back of his hand with his time at Bournemouth. And I think he knows what he can do to always improve players. And I think Wilfried Zaha he's a star player. Eddie Howe's your man. I think he's good at dealing with. He's had some big name players at Bournemouth as well. Let's not forget that. I think he can get the most out of Wilfried Zaha and encourage him to stay. And I think it would be a good fit. For fan base, yes. For success, no. Obviously, Chelsea, Tottenham, and Arsenal and West Ham have won more. I think like Palace, for fan base and passionate fan base, is up there. They've got one of the bigger fan bases in London. People forget that. They may not be a national club on fan base, but in London, south of the river, they are a big fan base. And further afield into like Surrey and Sussex, and even into Kent, they've got fans. Same with Millwall. Very passionate fan base. Quite a sizable one as well that goes unnoticed because they haven't won trophies. They're a big fan base. Why do you think Roma is so bad? It's looking good for Man United. I don't know. Roma is an interesting one. They've not been as successful as they should be. That's my opinion on Roma. They've got a passionate fan base. Half the city of Rome supports Roma, half the city supports Lazio. That rivalry will never be matched anywhere, I couldn't think. It's one of the most heated derbies in world football. They've been less successful than they should have been. But at the same time, you've got to look at investment in the squads, the style of play they play. But the fan base is there with Roma. I don't know why they're not where they should be, but their time will come again. Their time will come again with Roma. I think Juventus are faltering in Serie A. Things aren't going all that well for Juventus. There's a door opening for Serie A to suddenly become very competitive very, very soon. If Southgate fails to get England past the quarters, do you think he'll get sacked? If so, who should replace him? I can't see Southgate staying at England much longer, but he's the FA's yes man. Too much chopping and changing with the lineup. Not enough veteran players in that lineup. This is the problem with having Vardy and Cahill retire from international football, is they didn't feel Southgate was going with too many youngsters, not enough veterans. You need to have a good mix. He doesn't have that mix. Jordan Henderson is a veteran player, and I think for me should be the captain. Harry Kane should not be the captain. I think that's a mistake that he's made. I'm not sold on the defence, and I'm not sold on us in possession. Counter-attacking, yes. Possession football, no. So his tactics are too negative. We're reliant on set plays. You should be able to score more goals from open play. Right, I've got to go. Thank you very much. Bye for now. Hello. Okay. Cool. Yeah.